They said Clara Whitlock would die unwanted, a girl raised in shadows, mocked at her own family's table, invisible to a world that measured worth in beauty and bloodlines. She believed them, until the night Ronan Hale stormed into Iron Ridge Manor and shattered every rule she'd learned to survive by. He was dangerous, untamed, a duke who answered to no one. And he saw her. Not the ghost her family pretended didn't exist, but something they'd all missed. Now she stands at the edge of a decision that could destroy her, or remake her into something they'll never forget. This is her story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey reaches. Clara had learned to make herself small, not physically, though she'd mastered that too, the art of occupying corners, of standing behind door frames, of existing in the negative space between people who mattered, but small in the ways that counted. Small in voice, small in expectation. Small enough that when her stepmother Vivian looked right through her at breakfast, it didn't even register as cruelty anymore. It was just fact. The morning of her 26th birthday, Clara woke to silence. No knock on her door. No card slipped beneath it. Nothing from her father, Lord Edmund Whitlock, who spent his days in the study nursing whiskey and old grudges. Nothing from Vivian, who'd made it her life's work to remind Clara that she was the unwanted souvenir of Edmund's first failed marriage. And certainly nothing from her half-sisters, Lydia and Beatrice, who treated her existence like a persistent stain on otherwise pristine upholstery. She dressed in the dark, gray wool, high collar, no ornament, the kind of dress that apologized for taking up space. Downstairs, the morning room blazed with light and laughter. Lydia's voice carried through the hallway, bright and cutting. "Mother, you can't be serious. That shade of yellow makes me look jaundiced. Darling, you could wear a burlap sack and still outshine every girl at the Ashford ball." Vivian's reply dripped with maternal devotion. "But we'll order the blue as well. No harm in options." Clara paused at the doorway. She knew better than to enter unannounced, but the smell of fresh scones had drawn her down earlier than usual. Her stomach twisted with hunger. She'd skipped dinner the night before after Beatrice had made a show of wrinkling her nose when Clara reached for the roasted chicken. "Are you just going to hover there like a specter?" Beatrice's voice snapped across the room. All three women turned to stare. Lydia's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Vivian's expression went carefully blank, the look she wore when forced to acknowledge Clara's existence in front of the servants. "I was just—" Clara started. "Just what? Eavesdropping?" Lydia plucked a strawberry from her plate with delicate fingers. "How typical." "I came for breakfast." Breakfast was at 8. Vivian didn't look up from her correspondence. "It's 9:30. Clara's jaw tightened. She'd been up since dawn, scrubbing the mud from her boots after checking the stable, a task that should have fallen to the groundskeeper, but Edmund had dismissed half the staff last month, and somehow those duties always landed on her. She'd lost track of time. "My apologies." The words came automatically, smoothed by years of practice. "I'll just— Oh, do sit down." Lydia waved a careless hand toward the chair farthest from the fire. "You're making the room depressing just standing there." Clara sat. A servant she didn't recognize, new girl, probably replacing the one Vivian had dismissed for burning toast, brought her a plate. One scone, no butter, no jam, a cup of tea that had gone lukewarm. Clara didn't complain. "We're discussing the Ashford ball," Beatrice announced, as if Clara had asked. "Lord Ashford's winter gathering, the event of the season. All the best families will be there." Lydia bit into her strawberry. "Which means we need to look absolutely flawless. No weak links in the Whitlock presentation." The implication hung in the air like smoke. "Clara won't be attending," Vivian said, still focused on her letters. "There's no point in wasting an invitation." Something flickered in Clara's chest. Not hurt, exactly. The hurt had been filed down to numbness years ago, but something adjacent to it, a ghost of what disappointment used to feel like. "Of course," she said quietly. "Besides," Beatrice added, "you'd hate it. All that dancing and small talk. You can barely string 2 words together in front of Father's friends." "Because they look at me like I'm furniture," Clara thought, but didn't say. Because the last time I tried to join a conversation at dinner, your mother told me my voice was giving her a headache. She ate her dry scone in silence while her sisters debated dress fittings and dance cards. The tea tasted like dishwater, but she drank it anyway. Waste was a sin in Vivian's household, at least when Clara was the one doing it. I heard Duke Hale might attend, Lydia said suddenly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. Beatrice gasped. Ronan Hale? The wild one? Is there another? Lydia leaned forward. Apparently Lord Ashford's been trying to lure him out of that fortress he calls an estate for years. Word is he finally accepted the invitation. Why would he come now? Beatrice frowned. Everyone knows he despises social gatherings. Who knows? Maybe he's finally decided to take a wife. Lydia's eyes glittered. Can you imagine? A duke, unmarried at 32 with that fortune? Vivian set down her pen with a sharp click. Ronan Hale is a brute with a title. No proper breeding, no respect for society. His father was barely better than a merchant. His father, Lydia countered, was an industrial genius who quadrupled the family fortune and earned his duchy through actual merit. And Ronan's expanded it even further. By refusing every social nicety and running his estate like a military camp, Vivian sniffed. The man doesn't even keep a London residence. Because he doesn't need to play games to matter, Beatrice said dreamily. How romantic. Clara kept her eyes on her plate, but she was listening. She'd heard of Ronan Hale. Everyone had. The Duke who'd told the Prince Regent to his face that he wouldn't attend the royal wedding because he had better things to do. The man who'd thrown a Viscount out of his own dinner party for mistreating a servant. Stories about him filtered through the county like wildfire, sometimes scandalous, sometimes admiring, always tinged with fear. A man who answered to no one. She couldn't imagine what that felt like. Well, Vivian said crisply, if he does attend, I expect you both to be on your best behavior. A man like that is dangerous, unpredictable. But rich, Lydia murmured. Entitled, Beatrice added. Vivian's silence was its own answer. Claire excused herself before they could remember she was there and find new ways to remind her she wasn't wanted. She slipped out through the servants' entrance and headed for the stables, the one place at Iron Ridge Manor where she could breathe. The stablemaster, old Tom, had been with the Whitlock family for 40 years. He'd known Clara's mother, the First Lady Whitlock, dead from fever when Clara was barely 3. He was one of the few people who looked at her like she was human. Morning, Miss Clara. He glanced up from mucking stalls. You're out early. Couldn't sleep. She grabbed a brush and moved toward Tempest, her mother's old mare. The horse was 23 now, gray around the muzzle, but still steady. Clara pressed her forehead to the mare's neck. How is she? Getting old, like the rest of us. Tom smiled. But she perks right up when you visit. Clara spent the next hour grooming Tempest, letting the repetitive motion calm the churning in her chest. Out here, she didn't have to perform, didn't have to shrink. Horses didn't care about bloodlines or beauty, they only cared if you were kind. She was finishing Tempest's hooves when she heard it. Hoofbeats, fast and hard, coming up the main road. Tom frowned. We expecting visitors? Not that I know of. They both moved to the stable entrance. A single rider came into view, mounted on a black stallion that looked like it had been carved from midnight. The man riding it sat like he'd been born in the saddle, easy, confident, completely in control of an animal that was clearly only tolerating being controlled. Clara's breath caught. She knew who he was before Tom whispered it. That's Duke Hale. He was taller than she'd imagined, broader. He wore a dark riding coat that had probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, but it looked lived in, practical. His hair was black, windswept, longer than was fashionable, and his face, not handsome in the delicate way of drawing-room lords, handsome in the way cliffs were handsome. Sharp lines, hard jaw, a mouth that looked like it didn't smile often. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Dark, intense, scanning the estate like he was cataloging everything in it. When his gaze landed on her, Clara felt it like a physical thing. She should have looked away, should have ducked back into the stable, but something kept her frozen, the same instinct that made deer stand still when predators passed. Ronan Hale dismounted in one smooth motion. He handed the reins to Tom without looking at him, his attention still fixed on Clara. You work here? His voice was low, rough-edged, not the polished accent of London aristocracy. Clara's throat went dry. I live here. One dark eyebrow rose. Whitlock family? She nodded. You're a long way from the main house. It wasn't quite a question. I prefer the stables. The corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile exactly, but something adjacent to it. Smart. Before Clara could process that, Vivian's voice cut across the courtyard like a whip. Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure! Clara watched her stepmother materialize from the house, Lydia and Beatrice flanking her like ladies in waiting. All three of them had transformed, postures straightened, smiles deployed, every movement suddenly graceful. Vivian swept forward, hand extended. Lord Edmund will be absolutely delighted. We had no idea you were in the area. Ronan took her hand briefly, too briefly to be truly polite, and released it. I need to speak with Lord Whitlock. Is he available? Of course, of course. Vivian's smile never wavered, but Clara saw the calculation in her eyes. Please do come inside. We were just about to take tea. I'll wait here. The words were flat, final. Not rude exactly, but utterly disinterested in pretense. Vivian's smile tightened. Surely you'd be more comfortable. I'm comfortable here. Ronan's gaze flickered past her toward the house, then back to Clara. Send Whitlock out. It wasn't a request. Vivian's face went through several expressions in rapid succession before settling on gracious accommodation. Of course, Lydia, fetch your father immediately. Lydia rushed off. Beatrice hovered, clearly unwilling to abandon the most exciting thing that had happened at Iron Ridge Manor in months. Clara started to retreat toward the stable, but you. Stay. She froze, slowly turned back. Ronan was looking at her again, that same intense focus that made her feel dissected and seen all at once. Me? Unless there's another you I'm talking to. Beatrice let out a small, offended noise. Vivian looked like she'd swallowed glass. Your Grace, Vivian began, voice strained with forced politeness. This is Clara, Lord Edmund's daughter from his first marriage. She's not relevant, Beatrice finished sweetly. Ronan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold. He looked at Beatrice the way you'd look at something unpleasant you'd stepped in. I didn't ask you. The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Clara's heart hammered. She'd never seen anyone speak to Beatrice like that. Seen anyone look at her stepfamily with anything other than admiration or fear or calculated interest. Lord Edmund emerged from the house, still buttoning his waistcoat. His face was flushed. From drink or surprise, Clara couldn't tell. Duke Hale! This is quite unexpected. Edmund's smile was oily, uncertain. To what do we owe the honor? Ronan turned to face him fully. I need to purchase land. Timber rights, specifically. I was told you own the northern forest parcels. Edmund blinked. Yes, I do, but those aren't for sale. Everything's for sale. Ronan's tone suggested this was fact, not opinion. Name your price. Well, Edmund glanced at Vivian, who gave him a look Clara couldn't decipher. Perhaps we should discuss this inside over brandy. I don't drink during business. Ronan pulled a folded paper from his coat. I've had my solicitor draw up an offer. It's more than fair. Edmund took the paper with shaking hands. His eyes widened as he scanned it. This is, Your Grace, this is triple the land's worth. I know what it's worth. Ronan's voice was flat. I also know you need money. You've dismissed half your staff, you're 3 months behind on your grain supplier, and your credit in town is shot. The color drained from Edmund's face. Vivian looked like she'd been slapped. Even Lydia and Beatrice had gone quiet. Clara felt a strange, vicious satisfaction watching her father squirm. How do you... Edmund started. I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. Ronan's gaze swept over the manor, the overgrown gardens, the peeling paint on the shutters. You can take the offer or watch this place crumble further. Your choice. Edmund's hands trembled. I'll need to consult with... You have 3 days. Ronan turned toward his horse. Send word to Hale Park when you've decided. He was mounting up when his eyes found Clara again. This time he held her gaze for a long moment, long enough that she felt Vivian's attention sharpen, Beatrice's jealousy spike. Then he was gone, galloping back down the road like he hadn't just detonated a bomb in their morning. The silence lasted exactly 5 seconds. "Inside," Vivian hissed. "All of you, now!" They crowded into Edmund's study. Dark wood, dusty books, the smell of old tobacco. Edmund slumped into his chair, the paper still clutched in his hand. "This changes everything," he muttered. "How much is he offering?" Lydia demanded. Edmund showed her. She gasped. "We could pay off all the debts," Beatrice said quickly. "Completely, and have enough left to get you properly launched in London," Vivian finished, her mind clearly racing. "Real seasons, real prospects." "But the timber rights," Edmund started weakly, "are worthless if we lose the estate entirely." Vivian's voice turned sharp. "You know the bank's been circling. This is Providence, Edmund." Clara watched from the corner, invisible again. Part of her wanted to feel sympathy for her father. The man was clearly drowning, but the larger part, the part that remembered every dismissal, every casual cruelty, felt nothing. "Did you see the way he looked at you, Mother?" Lydia was practically glowing. "A man like that is not here for social calls," Vivian said firmly. "He wants land, not company." "But if he's attending the Ashford ball," Beatrice's voice trailed off meaningfully. Clara slipped out while they plotted. No one noticed. She went back to the stables, back to Tempest, and pressed her face against the mare's warm neck. "He looked at me," she whispered to the horse. "Just for a second, like I was actually there." Tempest nickered softly. Clara closed her eyes and tried not to think about dark eyes and harder truths. 3 days later, Edmund signed the contract. The money arrived within the week, delivered by Ronan's steward, a efficient man who didn't stay for tea. Edmund paid off his most pressing debts, ordered repairs for the manor, and gave Vivian a generous allowance for Lydia and Beatrice's wardrobes. Clara received nothing. She hadn't expected to. But something had shifted in the house. Vivian was sharper, more calculating. Lydia and Beatrice practiced their dancing with renewed vigor. They talked about the Ashford ball constantly, about who would be there, what they'd wear, how they'd position themselves. And always, always the conversation circled back to Ronan Hale. "He's going to be there," Lydia insisted at dinner one night. Lord Ashford confirmed it. "And you think he'll pay you any attention?" Edmund's voice was bitter. He'd been drinking more since the sale went through, like the money only reminded him how badly he'd failed. "Men like Hale don't marry girls like you." "Girls like us?" Beatrice's voice went cold. "What does that mean?" "It means you're provincial, small time. He runs in circles you can't even imagine." Vivian's fork clinked against her plate. "That's enough, Edmund." But he wasn't done. "You think a man who told the Prince Regent to go to hell is going to be impressed by pretty dresses and vapid conversation?" "Better than being impressed by nothing," Lydia shot back, her eyes cutting toward Clara. Clara kept eating. The roasted potatoes tasted like sawdust, but she forced them down. "At least we'll be there," Beatrice said pointedly. "Some of us actually get invited to things." The words were designed to wound. They didn't, not anymore. Clara had built up scar tissue. But later, alone in her room, she stood at the window and looked out at the dark forest where Ronan Hale's timber crews were already working. She wondered what it felt like to be him, to walk into a room and have people scramble, to say no and have it mean something, to exist in the world without apology. She'd never know. The night before the Ashford ball, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to Lydia and Beatrice giggling in the next room, their excitement bleeding through the walls. Vivian had spared no expense. New gowns, new jewelry, a rented carriage that didn't look like it was held together with prayers and rust. Clara had helped with the preparations, fetched and carried, hemmed and pressed, made herself useful in the ways she'd been trained to. No one had thanked her. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and pulled on her coat. The manor was quiet, everyone else lost in dreams of triumph. She slipped outside into the cold. The forest called to her, the northern woods that weren't theirs anymore. She walked the familiar paths, her breath misting in the frigid air. Moonlight filtered through bare branches, turning everything silver and strange. She found herself at the old boundary stone, the marker between Whitlock land and what was now Hale territory. She sat on it, pulling her coat tighter, and looked up at the stars. Couldn't sleep either? Clara's heart stopped. She spun around. Ronan Hale stood 10 feet away, barely visible in the shadows. He was dressed for riding, his horse tied to a nearby tree. I'm sorry. She scrambled to her feet. I didn't know anyone else was... You apologize a lot. It wasn't a question, but it felt like an accusation. Clara's mouth closed. She didn't know how to respond to that. Ronan moved closer, his boots crunching on frost-hard ground. In the moonlight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. What are you doing out here? I could ask you the same thing. The words came out before she could stop them, bold, challenging. She braced herself for anger. Instead, that almost smile flickered across his face again. Fair enough. I'm checking the timber survey, making sure my crews aren't cutting into protected growth. At midnight? I don't sleep much. He studied her. Your turn. Clara hesitated. I like the quiet. The house is loud, even when everyone's asleep. Especially then. He seemed to understand that. They stood in silence for a moment, the forest breathing around them. You're not going tomorrow, Ronan said finally, to Ashford's ball. It wasn't a question. No. Why not? Because I wasn't invited. Because I'd embarrass them. Because I don't matter. Clara bit back all the true answers and settled for, I don't enjoy those events. Liar. Her head snapped up. Excuse me? You're lying. Ronan's voice was matter-of-fact. Not about disliking them. That part's probably true. But that's not why you're not going. Clara's throat tightened. You don't know anything about me. I know you're the daughter they hide. The one they pretend doesn't exist except when they need something done. His eyes were relentless. I know you spend your days in the stables because it's the only place you're not reminded that your family wishes you weren't born. And I know you're out here in the middle of the night because tomorrow they're all going to leave, and you'll be alone in that house pretending it doesn't hurt. The accuracy of it stole her breath. Clara turned away, blinking hard. Why do you care? I don't. The honesty was brutal, but I recognized the look. She glanced back. What look? Someone who's learned to survive by being invisible. Ronan's voice went quiet. I used to have it too. Clara couldn't imagine this man, this duke who commanded rooms and refused princes, ever being invisible. Hard to believe, she said. My father was a tradesman's son who made his fortune in shipping and steel, bought his way into the aristocracy. Every door we walked through, people looked at us like we'd tracked mud on their carpets. Ronan's jaw tightened. My mother taught me to bow and scrape and apologize for existing. It took me years to unlearn it. How did you? Stopped caring what they thought. He said it like it was simple. Stopped trying to fit into their boxes, built my own rules. Must be nice, Clara said quietly, having that option. You think I was given options? Ronan's laugh was sharp. I made them, fought for them, sometimes literally. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to point out that he was a man, a duke, someone with power and money and the freedom to burn bridges without starving. But something in his expression stopped her. Why are you telling me this? She asked instead. Ronan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Less hard, more considering. I'm going to Ashford's ball tomorrow. I don't want to go, but I need to make an appearance. Show my face, make nice with people I despise, play the game long enough to close a business deal. He paused. I need a partner, someone to stand beside me, deflect attention. Make it look like I'm there for social reasons instead of professional ones. Clara's heart started to pound. What are you saying? I'm saying, come with me. The words hung in the frozen air between them. That's insane, Clara breathed. I wasn't invited. I don't have a dress. Your reputation. My reputation is already in shambles. That's the point. Ronan stepped closer. I don't need someone polished and perfect. I need someone real. Someone who won't simper and faint when Lord Ashford's wife makes her little cutting remarks. Someone who survived worse than a ballroom full of sharks. You don't know me, Claire repeated, but weaker this time. I know enough. His eyes pinned her in place. I know you're strong enough to endure a family that treats you like garbage and still get up every morning. I know you're smart enough to survive in a house that wants you to disappear. And I know... He paused, something flickering across his face. I know you're tired of being invisible. Clara's breath came short. Every rational part of her screamed that this was madness, that she'd be torn apart, humiliated, destroyed. But there was another part, the part that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed, that whispered, yes. What would I have to do? Her voice barely carried. Show up. Stand next to me. Let them see you. Ronan's voice dropped. Let them see you're not afraid. I am afraid. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He held out his hand. One night, that's all I'm asking. After that, you never have to see any of them again if you don't want to. Clara looked at his hand, looked at the forest around them, looked at the future she could see stretching ahead, years and years of the same silence, the same smallness, until she disappeared completely. She took his hand. His grip was warm, calloused, solid. I'll send a carriage at 7, Ronan said. And Clara? She looked up. Don't tell your family. Let it be a surprise. The smile that crossed his face then was sharp and dangerous and absolutely merciless. Clara smiled back. For the first time in her life, she smiled back. The carriage arrived at exactly 7. Clara watched it from her bedroom window, sleek, black, pulled by 4 horses that looked like they'd been bred for war rather than transport. The Whitlock family had left 2 hours earlier in their rented coach, Vivian's voice shrill with last-minute instructions to Lydia and Beatrice about posture and eye contact. None of them had looked for Clara. None of them had said goodbye. She'd spent the afternoon in a strange, detached calm. Part of her kept waiting for panic to set in, for the voice that had kept her small and safe for 26 years to start screaming that this was suicide. But it never came. Instead, there was only a cold, clear certainty. She was done being invisible. The dress had arrived at noon, delivered by a stern-faced woman who'd introduced herself as Mrs. Garrison, Duke Hale's housekeeper. She'd swept into Clara's room like a general inspecting troops, taken one look at Clara's threadbare wardrobe, and made a noise that managed to convey both sympathy and professional offense. We'll work with what we have, she'd said, which Clara suspected was polite code for, this is a disaster. But the dress itself. Clara touched the fabric now, still hardly believing it was real. Deep emerald silk that caught the lamplight and turned it liquid. Not the pale pastels Vivian insisted were proper for young women. Not the washed-out grays Clara had worn for years. This was color that demanded attention, that refused to apologize. The cut was simple, no excessive ruffles or bows. But it fit like it had been made for her body specifically, which Mrs. Garrison had explained with brisk efficiency it had been. His Grace had your measurements from the dressmaker in town, she'd said, pinning Clara's hair. Don't ask me how. The man notices things. Now watching the carriage wait in the darkening courtyard, Clara felt her heart kick against her ribs. She could still back out, could send word that she'd changed her mind, could return to her small room and her smaller life and let this moment pass like a fever dream. Her hand was on the door handle before she'd made the conscious choice to move. The driver, a man built like a boulder with a face that suggested he'd seen things that would make grown men weep, opened the carriage door without comment. Clara climbed in, her borrowed gloves trembling slightly. Ronan sat across from her in the dim interior, dressed in black with a silver waistcoat that probably cost more than Iron Ridge Manor's annual income. He looked like he was preparing for battle, not a ball. His eyes swept over her, clinical and assessing. You'll do, he said finally. Clara felt something sharp twist in her chest. Disappointment, maybe, though she couldn't say why she'd expected anything else. Thank you for the dress, she managed. It's beautiful. It's armor. Ronan's voice was flat. Same as mine. Remember that. The carriage lurched forward. Clara gripped the seat to steady herself. They rode in silence for several minutes, the only sound the rhythmic clatter of hooves on frozen ground. Clara's mind raced through everything that could go wrong. The looks, the whispers, the moment when Vivian saw her and... Stop. Clara's head jerked up. What? Stop thinking about them. Ronan's eyes were dark in the shadows. I can see it on your face. Whatever you're imagining, it's probably worse than reality. You don't know what they're capable of. No, but I know what you're capable of surviving. He leaned forward slightly. You wouldn't be here if you weren't ready for this. I'm not ready, Clara said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to be the person you need me to be. I don't need you to be anyone. Ronan's voice softened a fraction. I need you to be exactly who you are. Someone who doesn't play games because she never learned the rules in the first place. Clara laughed, a short, bitter sound. That's not an advantage. It's the only advantage that matters. He settled back. Everyone else in that ballroom will be performing, saying what they think they should say, acting how they think they should act. You're the only one who will be real. Real and completely out of place. Good. That makes two of us. The carriage hit a rut. Clara braced herself against the wall, and when she looked up again, Ronan was studying her with that same intense focus that made her feel dissected. Why did you say yes? He asked quietly. Clara considered lying, considered giving him some noble reason about wanting to help or being curious. But he'd called her a liar once already, and she'd hated how easily he'd seen through her. Because I'm tired, she said finally. Tired of being afraid, tired of making myself small, tired of watching my life happen to other people while I just exist on the margins. She met his eyes. And because you looked at me like I was actually there. Something shifted in Ronan's expression, too quick for her to name. You are there, he said. You've always been there. They just refused to see it. The words hit harder than they should have. Clara looked away, blinking against the sudden burn in her eyes. So what happens now? She asked when she trusted her voice again. What do I need to know? Ronan pulled a small card from his pocket and handed it to her. The guest list. Memorize the names that matter. Lord Ashford and his wife Eleanor, they're our hosts. Viscount Pembroke and his daughter Genevieve, she's been trying to trap me into marriage for 3 seasons. And Lord Sterling, the man I'm actually there to see. He owns the southern shipping routes I need for my timber export. Clara scanned the list. So many names, so many people who'd look at her and know she didn't belong. How do I... She started. You don't. Ronan's voice was firm. You don't try to impress them. You don't explain yourself. You stand beside me, and when someone asks who you are, you tell them your name. That's it. They'll ask more questions. Let them. A dangerous smile crossed his face. Let them wonder. Mystery makes people nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. Clara wanted to argue that she wasn't built for strategy, for mind games, for any of this. But the carriage was slowing, and through the window she could see the lights of Ashford Hall blazing against the night sky. Her pulse hammered in her throat. Last chance, Ronan said quietly. I can have the driver take you home. No questions asked. Clara looked at the manor house, massive, imposing, filled with people who would tear her apart the moment they smelled weakness. She thought about Vivian's face when she realized Clara was there, thought about Lydia and Beatrice's shock, thought about walking into that room and refusing to disappear. No, she said. I'm going in. Ronan's smile widened. Good. The carriage stopped. The door opened. Ronan stepped out first and turned back, offering his hand. Clara took it. The moment her feet touched the ground, she heard the whispers start. They were still in the courtyard, but other guests were arriving, stepping out of carriages, adjusting cloaks, stealing glances at the tall man in black and the woman in emerald who'd arrived with him. Who is that? Is that Duke Hale? Who's the girl? Ronan's hand tightened on hers. Not gentle, but grounding. Anchor steady. Head up, he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. Shoulders back. You're not asking permission to exist. Clara straightened her spine, lifted her chin, let him guide her toward the entrance. The grand staircase leading up to Ashford Hall's main doors was lined with footmen holding torches. At the top, Lord and Lady Ashford stood receiving guests, him portly and genial, her thin and sharp-eyed. Eleanor Ashford's gaze landed on Clara like a blade. Duke Hale, she said as they reached the top. Her voice was crystal-cut glass. What a delightful surprise. We'd heard you might not attend. I changed my mind. Ronan's tone suggested this was explanation enough. Eleanor's eyes slid to Clara. And you've brought a guest. How unexpected. This was it. The moment where Clara was supposed to explain herself, to apologize for existing, to make herself small enough to slip through unnoticed. She felt the old instinct rise like muscle memory. But Ronan's hand was still on hers, and his words echoed in her head. You don't explain yourself. Clara Whitlock, she said, meeting Eleanor's stare directly. Thank you for your hospitality. Eleanor's eyebrows rose fractionally. Surprised, Clara realized, that she'd spoken at all. Whitlock, Eleanor repeated slowly. Edmund Whitlock's daughter? Yes. A pause that stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. How interesting, Eleanor said finally, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. I wasn't aware Edmund had, that is, we don't often see you in society. No, Clara agreed. You don't. She didn't elaborate, didn't fill the silence with nervous explanations, just let the words hang there. Ronan's hand tightened on hers again. Approval, she thought. Lord Ashford, who'd been watching the exchange with poorly concealed amusement, clapped Ronan on the shoulder. Well, come in, come in. No sense standing in the cold. The dancing's about to start. They moved into the entrance hall, all marble and gold leaf and crystal chandeliers that threw light like fractured stars. Clara had never been anywhere so opulent. It made Iron Ridge Manor look like a farmer's cottage. First test passed, Ronan murmured as they walked. Eleanor Ashford can smell fear like a hunting dog. You didn't flinch. I was terrified. I know, but you didn't show it. He guided her toward the ballroom. That's all that matters. The ballroom doors opened and sound crashed over them. Music, laughter, the rustle of expensive fabric and the clink of champagne glasses. Hundreds of people, all dressed in their finest, all playing the same elaborate game of see and be seen. Clara's breath caught, and then she saw them. Vivian stood near the far wall, flanked by Lydia and Beatrice. All three were dressed in matching pale pink, Vivian's idea of sophisticated coordination. They looked like strawberry tarts. Lydia saw Clara first. Her champagne glass actually slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound cut through the conversation around them. Heads turned, including Vivian's. For one perfect crystalline moment, Clara watched her stepmother's face cycle through emotions. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, beautifully, rage. Vivian started toward them, her face tight with barely controlled fury. Here we go, Ronan said quietly. He sounded almost amused. Vivian reached them in seconds, Lydia and Beatrice scrambling to keep up. She positioned herself between Clara and the rest of the room as if trying to block her from view. What are you doing here? Vivian's voice was a hiss, low enough not to carry but sharp enough to draw blood. How dare you, Lady Whitlock? Ronan's voice cut across hers like a knife through silk. How delightful to see you again. Vivian's mouth snapped shut. She turned to Ronan, and Clara watched her rearrange her expression into something approximating graciousness. Your Grace, I apologize. I was simply surprised to see Clara here. There must have been some confusion with the invitations. No confusion. Ronan's tone was pleasant, conversational, and completely unyielding. I invited her as my guest. The silence that followed was atomic. Beatrice's mouth fell open. Lydia looked like she'd been struck. And Vivian's face went through several colors before settling on a mottled red. Your guest, she repeated faintly. Is there a problem with that? Ronan asked. The question was polite. The steel underneath it was not. No, of course not. I simply... Vivian's voice cracked. She looked at Clara, and for the first time in Clara's life, she saw something other than contempt in her stepmother's eyes. She saw fear. Clara, Vivian said, and the name sounded wrong in her mouth. Too careful, too considered. Perhaps we should speak privately. No need. Clara surprised herself with how steady her voice came out. I'm exactly where I want to be. Lydia let out a small, strangled noise. But you can't just... Can't what? Ronan's voice was casual, but his eyes had gone cold. Attend a ball, Accept an invitation? Exist in public? No one had an answer for that. If you'll excuse us, Ronan continued, already turning away, I believe they're about to start the dancing. He guided Clara away before any of them could recover. She could feel their stares boring into her back, feel the weight of their shock and confusion and impotent rage. It felt incredible. That, Ronan said once they were out of earshot, was better than I expected. I thought I was going to be sick. You didn't show it. He led her toward the edge of the dance floor. That's twice now you've held your ground. You're learning. Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. They're staring at us. Everyone's staring. Good. Let them look. Ronan positioned himself so his back was to the room, blocking most of the sightlines. In about 30 seconds, someone's going to ask me to introduce you. When they do, you remember what I told you. Name only. Nothing else. What if they press? They will. You ignore it. His eyes locked on hers. You're not on trial, Clara. You don't owe them explanations. A woman approached, tall, blonde, beautiful in the way that suggested considerable effort. Her dress was cut low enough to be suggestive, but expensive enough to be acceptable. Ronan. Her voice purred his name like they were intimate. How lovely to see you finally attending one of these tedious affairs. Genevieve. Ronan's tone was flat. Still trying to marry money? She laughed, a practiced sound that probably worked on most men. Still trying to avoid it? How tiresome. Her eyes cut to Clara. And who's your little friend? Clara felt the dismissal in that word. Little. Felt the way Genevieve's gaze catalogued her dress, her hair, her complete lack of jewelry beyond the simple borrowed gloves. Clara Whitlock, she said before Ronan could answer. Genevieve's smile sharpened. Whitlock? Oh yes, Edmund's daughter, the one who… She paused delicately. Well, how brave of you to venture out. The implication was clear, how brave to show your face when everyone knows you're unwanted. Clara felt the old shame try to surface, felt the instinct to shrink, to apologize, to make herself disappear. But Ronan's presence beside her was solid, unyielding, and his words echoed, You don't explain yourself. Thank you, Clara said simply. Genevieve blinked, clearly expecting more. When nothing else came, her smile turned brittle. Well, I'm sure we'll chat later. She touched Ronan's arm, her fingers lingering. Save me a dance? No? The word was so flat, so final, that even Clara winced. Genevieve's hand dropped. Excuse me? I said no. Ronan's expression hadn't changed. I'm not dancing with you tonight. Or any night. I thought I'd made that clear the last 3 times you asked. Color flooded Genevieve's face. You're being incredibly rude. I'm being honest. There's a difference. He turned slightly toward Clara. If you'll excuse us. Genevieve stalked away, her back rigid with fury. Clara watched her go, something like awe building in her chest. You really don't care what they think, she said quietly. Not even a little. Ronan scanned the room. There. Sterling's by the terrace doors. Come on. He guided her through the crowd, his hand at the small of her back. People parted for them, some out of respect, some out of unease. Clara caught fragments of conversation. That's Whitlock's daughter, the one they never… Can't believe he brought her. What's his game? She kept her chin up, kept her expression neutral, refused to let them see how much their words landed. Lord Sterling was a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a merchant's calculating smile. He greeted Ronan with genuine warmth. Hail! Didn't think you'd actually show. I keep my word. Ronan shook his hand. Sterling, may I present Miss Clara Whitlock. Clara, Lord Sterling. Sterling bowed. A pleasure, Miss Whitlock. Any friend of Hale's is a friend of mine. Friend. The word settled over Clara like an ill-fitting coat, but Sterling seemed to mean it kindly, so she smiled. The pleasure is mine, Lord Sterling. They talked business, shipping routes, and timber contracts and profit margins. Clara stood quietly beside Ronan, half listening, half watching the room. She spotted her stepmother near the refreshment table, talking urgently with another woman. Lydia and Beatrice hovered nearby, their faces tight with poorly concealed fury. Let them stew, Clara thought with vicious satisfaction. Miss Whitlock? She startled. Sterling was looking at her expectantly. I apologize, I was distracted. I was asking if you ride, Sterling repeated. Hale here mentioned he's been expanding his stables. Thought you might have an opinion on breeding stock. Clara glanced at Ronan. His expression gave nothing away, but she had the sense this was another test. I do ride, she said carefully. Though I'm no expert on breeding, I prefer older horses, honestly, the ones with experience. Sterling's eyebrows rose. Most young ladies want the flashy young stallions. Most young ladies haven't spent much time in stables. Clara felt herself settling into more familiar ground. A good horse doesn't need to be pretty, just reliable. Sensible, Sterling nodded approvingly. Wish more people thought like that. I've wasted a fortune on animals that looked magnificent and performed miserably. The conversation shifted to horses, a topic Clara actually knew something about. She found herself relaxing slightly, the words coming easier. Sterling seemed genuinely interested in her opinions, not just humoring her. When he finally excused himself to find his wife, he shook Clara's hand again. Delightful to meet you, Miss Whitlock. Hale, we'll finish our discussion tomorrow. I think we can come to terms. After he left, Ronan looked at Clara with something approaching approval. You did well. I didn't say anything impressive. You were yourself. That's more impressive than anything you could have pretended to be. He paused. And Sterling likes you. That helps. Before Clara could respond, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Couples moved onto the dance floor, swirling into formation. Ronan held out his hand. Clara stared at it. I don't know how to waltz. I know, I'll lead. But everyone will see. Everyone's already seeing. His eyes challenged her. One more line to cross, Clara. You up for it? Her heart hammered. Dancing meant being on display. Meant every eye in the room watching her stumble and fail. Meant giving them exactly what they expected, proof that she didn't belong. But it also meant not backing down. She took his hand. The ballroom floor felt like ice beneath her feet. Ronan's hand settled on her waist, warm even through the fabric of her dress. His other hand clasped hers, firm and steady. Follow my lead, he murmured. Don't look at your feet. Look at me. The music swelled. Ronan moved and Clara followed, clumsily at first, her steps uncertain. She felt eyes on them, felt the weight of judgment. Ignore them, Ronan said quietly. It's just us. She tried, fixed her gaze on his face instead of the watching crowd. Slowly, her body began to understand the rhythm. Not gracefully, she'd never be graceful, but competently. Enough. Why are you doing this? She asked as they turned. Really? It can't just be about business. Ronan's expression flickered. Maybe I'm tired of playing their game alone. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight. They danced in silence for a moment. Then, you know they'll never forgive you for this, Clara said quietly. My family. They'll see this as betrayal, humiliation. Good. You don't even know them. I know enough. Ronan's voice hardened. I know your stepmother would have sold you to the first man who'd take you off her hands if she thought anyone would have you. I know your sisters treat you like a servant. I know your father drinks himself stupid rather than face what he's allowed to happen under his own roof. His eyes burned into hers. So no, I won't lose sleep over their forgiveness. The venom in his voice surprised her. Why do you care? I don't. But something in his face suggested otherwise. I just hate waste. Is that what I am? A waste? Your potential they tried to bury. The music swelled. They turned again and Clara's foot caught on her hem. She stumbled. Ronan's arm tightened, steadying her before she could fall. There, see? You didn't collapse. World didn't end. Clara found herself almost smiling. Set your standards high, don't you? For you? Absolutely. The dance ended. Applause rippled through the room, polite, automatic. Ronan released her, but his hand caught hers again before she could step away. Don't run, he murmured. We're not done yet. The rest of the evening blurred together in fragments. Introductions to people whose names Clara immediately forgot. Stilted conversations where she answered in careful monosyllables. Vivian's furious glares from across the room. Through it all, Ronan stayed close, a constant presence that both steadied and unnerved her. Around midnight, he guided her out onto the terrace. The cold air hit like a slap after the stifling heat of the ballroom. Clara breathed deep, letting the chill clear her head. "You survived," Ronan said. "Barely. But you did." He leaned against the stone railing. "That's all that matters." Clara joined him, looking out over the frost-covered gardens. In the distance, she could see other guests on the terrace, couples stealing moments away from watchful chaperones, groups of men smoking cigars and talking politics. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you go home." Ronan's voice was matter-of-fact. "Tomorrow, everyone will be talking about tonight. Your stepmother will probably lock you in your room. Your sisters will make your life hell." "Comforting." "I didn't say it would be comfortable. I said you'd survive it." He looked at her. "You've survived worse." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to point out that tonight had changed nothing. She was still unwanted, still powerless, still trapped in a house that wished she didn't exist. But standing here, wearing a dress that made her feel like something other than a ghost, having spent an evening where people had actually looked at her and seen a person. Maybe something had changed after all. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For tonight." Ronan's expression softened fractionally. "Don't thank me yet. This was the easy part." "Easy." "You showed up. You stood in a room full of vultures and didn't break." His voice dropped. "But tomorrow starts the real work. If you want to keep existing in their world, if you want to stop being invisible, you're going to have to fight for it, every day, until they either accept it or choke on it." Clara's chest tightened. "I don't know if I can do that." "You can." Ronan straightened, his eyes pinning her in place. "And you will, because you've already proven something tonight." "What's that?" "That you're done being afraid." Before Clara could respond, Vivian's voice cut through the darkness. "Clara, get inside this instant!" Clara turned. Her stepmother stood in the terrace doorway, backlit by the ballroom's glow. Her face was a mask of barely controlled rage. "Now," Vivian hissed. Every instinct Clara had screamed at her to obey, to drop her eyes, to apologize, to make herself small again. But Ronan's hand found hers in the darkness, just for a moment, just long enough to ground her. "No," Clara said. Vivian's eyes went wide. "What did you say?" "I said no." Clara's voice shook, but it held. "I'll come inside when I'm ready." The shock on Vivian's face was worth every terrifying second of this night. Her stepmother's mouth opened and closed. Then, without another word, she turned and stalked back inside. Clara's knees went weak. She gripped the railing to stay upright. "That," Ronan said quietly, "was the bravest thing you've done tonight." Clara laughed, a shaky, breathless sound. "I think I'm going to be sick." "Later. Right now, savor it." He stepped back. "My carriage will take you home whenever you're ready. But Clara?" She looked up. "This doesn't end here. Tomorrow morning, I'm sending someone to Iron Ridge Manor. You're going to learn to ride properly, to shoot, to fight if you need to. You're going to learn everything you should have been taught if anyone had bothered to see you as more than a mistake." Clara's breath caught. "Why?" "Because you asked me earlier what happens now." Ronan's smile was sharp and dangerous and absolutely certain. "Now? Now we make you into someone they can't ignore." The instructor arrived at dawn. Clara had barely slept. She'd returned to Iron Ridge Manor near 2 in the morning to find every light blazing and Vivian waiting in the entrance hall like a sentinel. The confrontation had been brutal, Vivian's voice sharp enough to cut glass, her accusations flying like arrows. Clara had stood there and taken it, saying nothing, until finally her stepmother had run out of words and stormed upstairs, slamming doors hard enough to shake the walls. Now, watching a tall woman with iron-gray hair dismount from a chestnut mare in the courtyard, Clara felt the exhaustion pulling at her bones. But she was awake. She was dressed. And she was ready. The woman strode toward her with military precision. She was older, maybe 50, with the kind of weathered face that suggested a life spent outdoors. Her riding habit was practical, well-worn, and she moved like someone who'd never apologized for taking up space. "Miss Whitlock?" Her voice carried authority without needing volume. "Yes. Captain Iris Thornby, Duke Hale sent me." She looked Clara up and down with a gaze that missed nothing. He says you need training. That true? Clara swallowed. I suppose. You suppose? Thornby's eyebrow arched. Either you want this or you don't. I don't waste time on half measures. Something in Clara's spine stiffened. I want it. Good. Then let's see what we're working with. Thornby turned toward the stables. You ride, I'm told. I do. We'll start there. Old Tom appeared from the tack room, leading Tempest. The mare nickered when she saw Clara, and for a moment, just a moment, Clara felt the anxiety ease. Thornby circled the horse, her expression thoughtful. She's old. She's steady, Clara countered. Steady won't save you when things go wrong. But Thornby's voice had softened slightly. Still, she'll do for basics. Mount up. Clara swung into the saddle with practiced ease. This, at least, she knew how to do. Thornby watched her settle, then nodded toward the northern fields. Show me what you've got. Full gallop to the tree line and back. Clara's heart kicked. She hadn't run Tempest hard in years. The mare was too old for it. She can't. I'm not asking the horse. I'm asking you. Thornby's eyes were relentless. You think the world's going to be gentle with you because you're afraid? Show me what you can do when it matters. The words struck like a match to kindling. Clara's jaw tightened. She leaned forward, whispered an apology to Tempest, and gave the mare her head. They flew. The cold air burned Clara's lungs, whipped tears from her eyes. Tempest stretched out beneath her, old bones remembering what they used to be, and for a few perfect seconds Clara forgot everything except the thunder of hooves and the rush of speed and the feeling of being completely, utterly alive. She pulled up at the tree line, her breath coming hard, wheeled Tempest around and galloped back. Thornby was waiting, arms crossed. When Clara reined in, the captain's expression had shifted, not quite approval, but something close. You can ride, she said. That's something, but you ride like you're trying not to be noticed, like you're apologizing for taking up space. She stepped closer. From now on, you ride like you own the ground beneath you, understand? Clara nodded, still catching her breath. Good. Tomorrow, 6 a.m, we'll work on posture, control, and getting that horse to actually listen when things get rough. Thornby turned toward her own mount. And Miss Whitlock? Yes? Duke Hale doesn't invest in people lightly. Don't waste his time. Or mine. She left without waiting for a response. Clara sat in the saddle for a long moment, Tempest's sides heaving beneath her. Through the window of the manor, she could see Vivian watching, face pale, lips pressed into a bloodless line. Let her watch, Clara thought. Let her see what happens when you try to bury someone who refuses to stay down. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and burning muscle. Thornby was relentless. Every morning before sunrise, Clara was in the saddle, learning to ride not just competently but commandingly, learning to sit straight even when her back screamed, learning to control a horse with her knees, her balance, her will. You're not asking, Thornby barked during their third session. You're begging. A horse can smell weakness the same way people can. Stop begging. Clara gritted her teeth and tried again, and again, and again, until her thighs burned and her hands blistered, and Thornby finally gave a curt nod. Better. Still not good, but better. In the afternoons, a different instructor arrived, a wiry man named Marcus, who taught her to shoot. He set up targets in the empty field behind the stables and handed her a pistol that felt impossibly heavy in her hand. You ever fired one of these? He asked. No. Good. Means you haven't learned bad habits. He positioned himself behind her, adjusting her stance. Feet shoulder width, knees bent, arms steady but not locked. Breathe in, let half out, then squeeze, don't pull, squeeze. The first shot went wide, the recoil nearly knocking Clara off her feet. The second wasn't much better. By the 10th, her ears were ringing and her hands were shaking, but the bullet punched through the edge of the target. Progress, Marcus said. We'll make a marksman out of you yet. Clara doubted that, but she kept practicing anyway. In the evenings, when she should have been collapsing into bed, Ronan himself appeared. He'd ride up to Iron Ridge Manor as the sun was setting, ignore Vivian's icy reception, and take Clara into the empty drawing room. Tell me what happened today, he'd say. And Clara would recount it, the riding lessons, the shooting practice, the moments of failure and tiny victories. Ronan would listen with complete attention, asking questions, offering adjustments, pushing her to think about what she'd learned. "Thornby says you're still riding defensively," he said one night, a week into the training. "Why?" Clara flexed her sore fingers. "Because I'm waiting for something to go wrong." "So stop waiting. Make it go wrong on your terms." He leaned forward. "Fear's useful when it keeps you alert. It's useless when it keeps you frozen. Learn the difference." Easy for you to say. You think I wasn't terrified the first time I stood up to someone who had power over me? Ronan's voice went hard. I was 16. My father had just died, and the board of directors thought they could push me out of my own company. Thought I was too young, too inexperienced, too much like my merchant-class father to deserve the title he'd earned. His eyes glittered in the lamplight. I was so scared I threw up before the meeting, but I walked in there anyway, and I made them understand that fear wasn't going to stop me. Clara stared at him. She'd never heard him talk about his past, never imagined him as anything other than the unshakable force he was now. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. "I told them the truth, that they could either work with me or watch me burn the company down around them." He smiled, sharp and cold. "They chose to work with me." "That's insane." "That's survival." He stood. "Same thing you're doing now, learning to be dangerous enough that people think twice before coming at you." Clara rose too, her legs protesting. "I'm not dangerous. Not yet." Ronan moved toward the door, then paused. "But you're getting there." After he left, Clara stood in the empty drawing room and tried to imagine herself as dangerous, as someone people feared instead of pitied. The image wouldn't come, but when she looked in the mirror later, she noticed something different. Her shoulders were straighter, her jaw was set harder, and her eyes didn't look away anymore. 2 weeks into the training, Vivian made her move. Clara was grooming Tempest after a particularly brutal riding session when her stepmother appeared in the stable doorway, flanked by Lydia and Beatrice. All three of them wore expressions of cold determination. "We need to talk," Vivian said. Clara didn't stop brushing. "So talk." "Not here. Inside." "I'm busy." Vivian's face tightened. "This isn't a request, Clara." Something in her tone made Clara set down the brush and turn. Her stepmother looked different, not just angry, but calculated, prepared. This was going to be bad. She followed them into the manor, into the same drawing room where Ronan had been teaching her to think like someone who mattered. The irony wasn't lost on her. Vivian closed the door with deliberate care. Then she turned, and her expression was ice. "This ends now." Clara crossed her arms. "What ends?" "This performance. This ridiculous charade with Duke Hale." Vivian's voice was controlled, precise. "I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but it stops today." "I'm not accomplishing anything. I'm learning to ride." "You're embarrassing this family." Lydia's voice was sharp. "Everyone's talking about you, about how you showed up at the Ashford ball like some opportunist trying to trap a duke." Clara felt anger flash hot in her chest. "I didn't trap anyone. He invited me. And you should have refused." Beatrice stepped forward. "You should have known your place." "My place?" Clara's voice rose despite herself. "And where is that exactly? Hiding in the shadows? Being grateful for scraps?" "Yes." Vivian's composure cracked. "Yes, Clara. That's exactly where you belong. You have never been part of this family's future. You are a burden we've tolerated out of obligation to your father. But this?" She gestured sharply. "This attention, this training, this association with Duke Hale, it reflects poorly on all of us." "How?" Clara demanded. "How does my existing reflect poorly on you?" "Because you're making us look weak." Lydia's face was flushed. "Like we can't control our own household. Like we let our charity case run wild and embarrass us in public." The word charity case landed like a slap. Clara had heard it before. Whispered behind hands, muttered in hallways, but never said to her face so plainly. "I'm your sister," she said quietly. "Half-sister," Beatrice corrected. "And barely that. Your mother was a mistake our father made before he knew better. You're just the reminder of it." The room went very still. Clara had known, on some level, that this was how they saw her. But hearing it said out loud, hearing the contempt dripping from Beatrice's voice, was different than knowing. "Get out," she said. Vivian's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "I said get out." Clara's voice was steady now, cold. "This is my mother's drawing room. You don't get to stand here and tell me I'm nothing." "Your mother is dead," Vivian said flatly. "And this is my house now. You don't give orders here." "Neither do you." The voice came from the doorway. Everyone spun. Edmund Whitlock stood there, swaying slightly. He was drunk. Clara could smell it from across the room, but his eyes were clearer than she'd seen them in months. "Edmund," Vivian started. "Shut up." He moved into the room with unsteady steps. "I've let you run this household because I was too much of a coward to do it myself. Let you treat my daughter like a servant because it was easier than standing up to you." His voice cracked. "But I'm done." Vivian's face went white. "You're drunk." "I'm always drunk. Doesn't make me wrong." Edmund looked at Clara, and something in his expression twisted her heart. "I failed you, failed your mother, watched you grow up in this house like a ghost and did nothing to stop it." He turned back to Vivian. "But no more. Clara stays. The training continues. And if you don't like it, you can leave." Lydia gasped. "Father, you can't." "I can. This is still my house, no matter how much you'd like to forget it." Edmund's voice gained strength. "And Clara is still my daughter, my first daughter. The only piece I have left of the only woman I ever actually loved." The silence that followed was devastating. Vivian's face cycled through shock, fury, and finally, terrifyingly, cold calculation. "Very well," she said quietly. "If that's your decision." She swept from the room, Lydia and Beatrice scrambling after her. The door slammed. Clara stood frozen, unsure what had just happened. Edmund slumped into a chair, suddenly looking older than his years. "I should have done that a long time ago," he said to no one in particular. Clara moved closer. "Father, don't." He held up a hand. Don't thank me. Don't forgive me. I don't deserve either." He looked up at her and his eyes were wet. "Your mother, Helen, she was brilliant, strong. Everything I wasn't. When she died, I should have honored her by raising you the way she would have wanted. Instead, I let Vivian bury you the same way grief buried me." Clara's throat tightened. "Why now? Why stand up for me now?" "Because Duke Hale came to see me 3 days ago." Edmund's laugh was bitter. "Told me exactly what was happening under my own roof, made me look at what I'd become. And he said," he paused, his voice breaking. "He said if I didn't start acting like your father, he'd make sure everyone in the county knew what kind of man I really was." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her. "Ronan did that?" "Apparently he doesn't make idle threats." Edmund stood, unsteady. "I don't know what his interest in you is, but he's right. You deserve better than what I've given you." He left before Clara could respond, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Clara sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Ronan had confronted her father, had threatened him into what? Caring? Pretending to care? She didn't know what to feel about that. The next morning, Thornby arrived to find Clara already in the saddle, waiting. "You're early," the captain observed. "I couldn't sleep." Thornby's sharp eyes assessed her. "What happened?" Clara told her about the confrontation, about her father's sudden spine, about discovering that Ronan had orchestrated it. When she finished, Thornby was quiet for a long moment. "You're angry," she said finally. "Shouldn't I be? He manipulated my father, made him do what he should have done years ago." Thornby's voice was hard. "Your father needed a push. Duke Hale gave him one. What matters is what you do now." "What I do? You have a choice." Thornby moved closer. "You can be angry that someone fought for you when you couldn't fight for yourself. Or you can accept the advantage and use it to become strong enough that you never need someone to fight for you again." Clara stared at her. "That's cold. That's realistic." Thornby's expression didn't soften. "The world doesn't care about fair, Miss Whitlock. It cares about power. Right now, you're learning to take yours. Don't waste time being offended by the method." The words settled over Clara like armor. uncomfortable but necessary. Now, Thornby said, let's work on your jumps. You're going to need them. They trained harder that day than ever before. Thornby set up obstacles in the field. Fallen logs, stacked stones, ditches filled with water. Made Clara jump them over and over until Tempest was lathered and Clara's whole body screamed. Again, Thornby barked when Clara's form slipped. You're dropping your shoulder, again! Clara's vision blurred with exhaustion, but she turned Tempest and ran at the jump once more. The mare cleared it, barely, and Clara nearly lost her seat on the landing. Better, Thornby's voice cut through Clara's panting breath, but not good enough. If you're going to survive what's coming, you need to be better than good enough. Clara's head snapped up. What's coming? Thornby's smile was grim. You think your stepmother's going to accept your father's ultimatum? She's already making moves. I'd give it 3 days before she tries something. How do you know? Because that's what I'd do. The captain's voice was matter-of-fact. You've become a threat to her plans. Threats get eliminated. The casual way she said it made Clara's blood run cold. What should I do? Keep training, stay alert, and don't trust anyone in that house except maybe your father, and even then not completely. Thornby gathered her horse's reins. Duke Hale's expecting you at Hale Park tomorrow evening. Don't be late. She rode off before Clara could ask why. Hale Park loomed against the evening sky like something out of a fever dream, all dark stone and tall windows and an air of absolute authority. Clara had never been here before, and as Ronan's carriage pulled up the long drive, she felt her courage waver. This was a mistake. She didn't belong in places like this. But Ronan was waiting at the entrance, and when she stepped down from the carriage, his expression stopped her spiral of doubt. You look terrible, he said. Clara almost laughed. Thank you. Very reassuring. I'm not here to reassure you, but his voice was gentler than his words. Come inside, we need to talk. He led her through halls that probably cost more than Ironridge Manor's entire estate, into a library that looked like it held every book ever written. A fire crackled in the massive hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Ronan poured 2 glasses of something amber and handed her one. I don't drink, Clara said. You do tonight. He waited until she took a sip. It burned down her throat, making her cough, then sat across from her. Thornby says you're progressing faster than expected. Thornby says I'm going to get myself killed if I'm not careful. She's probably right. Ronan studied her over the rim of his glass. Your stepmother's been making inquiries about me, about my intentions, about whether there's any truth to the rumors that we're... He paused. Involved. Heat flooded Clara's face. What did you tell her? Nothing. I don't answer to Vivian Whitlock. His eyes were dark in the firelight. But she's not going to let this go. She sees you as a problem that needs solving. I know. Clara took another sip of the drink, barely tasting it this time. My father stood up to her, told her I was staying, that the training continues. I heard. Because you made him. She met his gaze directly. You threatened him into caring about me. Ronan didn't deny it. Yes. Why? Because he should have been doing it all along. His voice was flat. Because watching him let you be destroyed was making me furious, and I don't have patience for cowards. You don't even know me, Clara said, frustration bleeding into her voice. Why do you care so much about what happens to me? Ronan set down his glass with careful precision. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, when I was 17, I watched my father get torn apart by the aristocracy he'd worked his whole life to join. They mocked him, undermined him, made him feel like he'd never be good enough no matter how much money he made or how much power he accumulated. His jaw tightened. It killed him. Not physically. That took another 5 years. But it killed the part of him that gave a damn about anything. Clara's breath caught. I swore I'd never let anyone make me feel that way, Ronan continued. Never let them convince me I was less because of where I came from, and I swore that if I ever had power, I'd use it to stop them from doing it to anyone else. His eyes locked on hers. So when I see someone like you, someone with strength they don't even recognize, being crushed by people who should be protecting them? Yes, I care. Because I remember what it feels like to be invisible. The honesty in his voice stole Clara's breath. I'm not strong, she whispered. You survived 26 years in a house that wanted you dead. You stood in front of 300 people who would have eaten you alive and didn't break. You're learning to ride and shoot and fight because you refuse to stay buried. Ronan leaned forward. That's not strength, Clara's eyes burned. It doesn't feel like strength, it feels like desperation. Strength usually does. He stood, moved to the fire. But there's something else you need to know, something I haven't told you. Clara's stomach dropped. What? The reason I'm training you, the reason I brought you to the Ashford ball, the reason I'm investing this much time in someone I barely know. He turned to face her, and his expression was harder than she'd ever seen it. I need a wife. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Clara stood shakily. What? Not for love. Not even for companionship. Ronan's voice was clinical, detached. For business. There's a consortium of old money families controlling the southern trade routes. They won't negotiate with me because they see me as new money, as illegitimate. But they will negotiate with a married duke from an established alliance. His eyes were relentless. I need someone who can stand beside me in those rooms and make them believe we're a legitimate partnership. Someone who won't crumble under their judgment. Clara felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. You want to marry me for business? I want to offer you a proposition. He stepped closer. Marry me. In name only, if that's what you prefer. Stand beside me for 1 year while I break their monopoly and establish my own roots. In return, I'll give you everything you need to build a life independent of your family. Money, property, freedom. After the year, we can divorce quietly, and you'll never have to answer to anyone again. Claire's mind reeled. This is insane. This is practical. But something flickered in his expression, something that looked almost like uncertainty. You want to escape Iron Ridge Manor, want to stop being invisible. This is how you do it. By being used? By using me right back. Ronan's voice softened. Clara, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm asking you to be my partner in taking down people who would destroy both of us if they could. And in return, I'm offering you a way out. Clara turned away, her hands shaking. A year ago, a month ago, she would have said yes without hesitation, would have seen it as the only escape she'd ever get. But now, I need time, she said. You have 3 days. Ronan's voice was back to business. After that, I'm making other arrangements. 3 days? Vivian's not going to wait longer than that to make her move. His eyes were hard. And when she does, you're going to need protection. This is the most efficient way to give it to you. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need his protection, didn't need his proposition, didn't need any of this. But the truth was simpler and more brutal. She did. She left Hale Park without giving him an answer, her mind churning all the way home. The carriage dropped her at Iron Ridge Manor just after midnight. The house was dark, except for one window, her father's study. Clara slipped inside quietly, intending to go straight to her room. But something made her pause outside the study door. She could hear voices, her father's, low and slurred, and someone else's. Vivian's. Can't let this continue, Vivian was saying. She's making us look ridiculous, making you look weak. I don't care how I look. Edmund's voice was tired. I care about doing right by my daughter. Your daughter from a woman who's been dead for 23 years. Vivian's tone turned sharp. What about your daughters who are alive, who need you to be strong so they can make good marriages? They'll be fine. They'll be ruined if Clara continues this association with Duke Hale. Everyone will think we're using her to trap him into an alliance. A pause. Unless that's exactly what you're hoping for. I'm not hoping for anything except to stop failing her. Vivian's laugh was cold. Then you're a fool. Clara is never going to be anything more than what she is, a reminder of your first wife. And the more you indulge this fantasy that she matters, the more damage you do to the daughters who actually have a future. Clara's hands clenched into fists. Get out, Edmund said quietly. Edmund, get out of my study, out of my sight. Before I say something we'll both regret. Footsteps approached the door. Clara barely had time to press herself into the shadows before Vivian swept past, her face a mask of cold fury. Clara waited until she heard her stepmother's door close upstairs. Then she knocked softly on the study door. "Come in." Edmund sat slumped in his chair, a half-empty bottle beside him. He looked up when Clara entered, and something in his expression broke. "You heard," he said. "Some of it." He nodded slowly. "She's not wrong, you know, about me being a fool, about you being a reminder." His voice cracked. "But she's wrong about you not mattering. You matter. You've always mattered. I was just too weak to show it." Clara moved closer. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I heard what Duke Hale offered you." Edmund's eyes were clear despite the alcohol. "He told me this afternoon, asked for my permission, which was decent of him, I suppose." Clara's breath caught. "And?" "And I told him it's your choice." He stood unsteadily. "But Clara, if you say yes, understand what you're walking into. Marriage to a man like Ronan Hale won't be easy. He's hard, uncompromising. He'll use you the way he uses everything else, as a tool to get what he wants. I know. But he'll also protect you, give you power, give you a life outside these walls." Edmund's voice dropped. "Which is more than I ever did." Clara looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw not the monster Vivian had married, but a broken man who'd loved someone once and never recovered from losing her. "I haven't decided yet," she said quietly. "Then decide carefully." He picked up the bottle, then set it down again without drinking. "And Clara, whatever you choose, I meant what I said. You're staying here as long as you want. Vivian can choke on it." Clara left him there and climbed the stairs to her room. She stood at the window, looking out at the dark forest where Ronan's timber crews worked, and tried to imagine a future that didn't involve Iron Ridge Manor. Tried to imagine saying yes to a man who saw her as a business arrangement. Tried to imagine what freedom might cost. She was still standing there when the sun came up, no closer to an answer than she'd been at midnight. The decision came 2 days later, and it came with blood. Clara was in the stables, working with Tempest, when she heard the shouting. She ran toward the house to find Vivian in the courtyard, her face twisted with rage, holding a letter in her shaking hand. "What have you done?" she screamed when she saw Clara. Clara stopped. "What are you talking about?" "This!" Vivian thrust the letter forward. "An invitation to the Duke of Somerset's hunting party, for you and Duke Hale, as if you're his acknowledged companion." Clara's heart kicked. She hadn't known about any invitation. "That has nothing to do with me," she started. "It has everything to do with you." Vivian's voice cracked. "You've humiliated this family, made us look like social climbers using our bastard daughter to trap a duke. Lydia and Beatrice have been cut from 3 events this week because of the association. 3. That's not my fault. It's absolutely your fault." Vivian stepped closer, and there was something dangerous in her eyes. "You were supposed to disappear, to be nothing. Instead, you've become a spectacle." "Because you made me nothing," Clara shot back. "Because you spent 26 years treating me like I was invisible. Well, I'm done being invisible. I'm done apologizing for existing." Vivian's hand cracked across Clara's face. The slap echoed in the courtyard. Clara stumbled back, her cheek burning, shock stealing her breath. "You will pack your things," Vivian said, her voice deadly quiet. "You will leave this house, tonight, and you will never come back." "You can't." "I can. Your father's authority doesn't extend past the walls of his study, and this is my household." Vivian's smile was vicious. "Leave, or I'll have the servants remove you." Clara stood there, her face throbbing, her mind racing. She could fight this, could appeal to her father, could... No, she was done fighting for scraps of acceptance from people who would never give it. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll go." Vivian blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "What?" "I said I'll go." Clara's voice was steady now, cold. "But not because you're forcing me, because I choose to." She turned and walked back to the stables, found Thornby's card in her pocket, the one the captain had given her on the first day, scrawled a single word on the back: "Yes." Then she sent old Tom to deliver it to Hale Park. By nightfall, Ronan's carriage was waiting. Clara climbed in with nothing but the clothes on her back and Tempest tied behind. She didn't look back at Iron Ridge Manor, didn't give Vivian the satisfaction. Ronan was waiting at Hale Park, his expression unreadable when she stepped down from the carriage. "I accept," Clara said before he could speak. "Your proposition, your marriage, all of it." Something flashed across his face, surprise maybe, or satisfaction. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm done being afraid." She met his eyes. "When do we start?" Ronan's smile was sharp and dangerous and absolutely certain. "Tomorrow. We announce the engagement at the Somerset hunt. Let them all choke on it." Clara felt her own smile answer his, cold and fierce and ready for war. Let them come. The morning of the Somerset hunt arrived with freezing rain and a sky the color of old bruises. Clara stood at the window of her new room at Hale Park, a space 3 times the size of what she'd had at Iron Ridge Manor, with furniture that didn't creak and curtains that weren't moth-eaten. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vivian's face, heard the crack of that slap, felt the weight of what she'd just agreed to. A marriage of convenience to a man she barely knew, a public declaration that would make her a target for every tongue in the county, a gamble that could either free her or destroy what little remained of her reputation. Behind her, Mrs. Garrison moved efficiently through the room, laying out clothing that looked more like battle gear than riding habit. "Duke Hale's orders," the housekeeper said, noting Clara's expression. "He wants you looking like you belong there, like you were born to it." The riding habit was deep burgundy wool, tailored to perfection. The boots were black leather, butter soft and clearly expensive. There was even a small hat with a veil that Clara suspected was meant to add mystery rather than modesty. "I look ridiculous," Clara said, staring at her reflection. "You look dangerous." Mrs. Garrison's voice was approving. "There's a difference." A knock at the door made them both turn. Ronan entered without waiting for permission, already dressed for the hunt in black and charcoal gray. He looked like he was preparing for war, not a social gathering. His eyes swept over Clara, assessing. "Good," he said. "You'll do." Clara bit back the urge to snap at him. "How generous." "I'm not being generous. I'm being accurate." He moved closer, his expression serious. "Listen carefully. Today's going to be brutal. Everyone at that hunt is going to be watching us, judging, calculating. They're going to try to pick you apart to see if you're real or if I've made some colossal mistake." Comforting. "I'm not here to comfort you." His voice was hard. "I'm here to make sure you understand what we're walking into. These people are sharks. They smell weakness and they attack. So you don't show weakness. I know that. Do you?" Ronan stepped closer, close enough that Clara could see the intensity in his dark eyes. "Because the moment we announce this engagement, everything changes. You won't just be Clara Whitlock anymore. You'll be my future wife, my partner, and that means every move you make reflects on both of us." The weight of it pressed down on Clara's chest like a physical thing. "What if I can't do this?" "Then we'll both go down in flames." He said it without hesitation. "But I don't think you will." "Why not?" "Because you've survived worse than a bunch of aristocrats with inflated egos." His voice softened fractionally. "And because you're too angry to quit now." He was right about that, at least. The anger that had been building for 26 years was a living thing in Clara's chest, hot and sharp and absolutely unwilling to back down. "So what's the plan?" she asked. Ronan's smile was cold and calculated. "We arrive together. We don't hide. We don't explain. When Somerset makes the announcement about the hunt, I'll add our news. Clean, simple, undeniable." He paused. "And then we watch them scramble." The carriage ride to Somerset Estate took 2 hours through increasingly miserable weather. Clara spent most of it in silence, trying to calm the chaos in her head. Ronan sat across from her, reading correspondence like they were heading to a business meeting instead of a social ambush. Finally, Clara couldn't take it anymore. "Do you ever get nervous?" she asked. He looked up from his papers. "About what?" "About any of this. About what people think. About whether your plans will work." Ronan considered the question. "No. Nervous implies I care about outcomes I can't control. I don't waste energy on that." That's not human. It's practical. He set down his papers. Fear and anxiety are useful when they keep you alert. They're useless when they paralyze you. I learned a long time ago to only feel things that serve a purpose. Clara stared at him. That sounds exhausting. Less exhausting than letting other people's opinions run my life. His eyes pinned her in place. You're going to have to learn that too. Today's the first test. The carriage slowed as they approached Somerset Estate, a sprawling manor that made even Hale Park look modest. The grounds were already filled with guests, horses, and servants scrambling to set up despite the rain. Clara's stomach twisted into knots. Last chance, Ronan said quietly. If you want out, say so now. I'll take you back to Hale Park. No judgment. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, saw the certainty in his face, the absolute conviction that this plan would work. And beneath that, something else, something that might have been respect. I'm not backing out, she said. Good. He opened the carriage door as they stopped. Then let's give them something to talk about. They stepped out together into the cold rain. Immediately heads turned, conversation stuttered and died. Clara felt the weight of dozens of stares, heard the whispers starting like wildfire. Is that Duke Hale with that girl? Heard she's nobody, just some... Ronan's hand found Clara's elbow, steady and grounding. Head up, he murmured. Show them you're not apologizing. Clara straightened her spine and let him guide her toward the main gathering. The Duke of Somerset, an older man with a salt and pepper beard and shrewd eyes, stood at the center greeting guests. When he saw Ronan approaching, his expression shifted into something calculating. Hale! Didn't expect you to brave this weather. I don't mind rain. Ronan's voice was casual. Somerset, may I present Miss Clara Whitlock? Clara, the Duke of Somerset. Somerset's eyes swept over Clara with open assessment. Miss Whitlock? I don't believe we've met. No, Your Grace. Clara kept her voice steady. This is my first Somerset hunt. Is it? Somerset's smile didn't reach his eyes. How delightful. And how did you come to know our Duke Hale? This was the moment. The question everyone wanted answered. Clara felt Ronan's hand tighten fractionally on her arm. A reminder, not a prompt. Duke Hale is a family friend, she said simply. It wasn't a lie exactly, but it also wasn't the whole truth, and Somerset's raised eyebrow suggested he knew it. I see. Well, welcome to Somerset Estate. I'm sure you'll find the hunt quite exciting. They moved past him, deeper into the crowd. Clara caught sight of familiar faces. Lord and Lady Ashford, Genevieve Pembroke looking sour, various other aristocrats she recognized from the ball. And then her breath caught. Vivian stood near the stables with Lydia and Beatrice, all three of them dressed in pale lavender that looked washed out in the gray light. Her stepmother's face was carefully blank, but her eyes were chips of ice. Their gazes locked across the courtyard. For one long, tense moment, neither moved. Then Vivian's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if smiles could cut. She's here, Clara said quietly. I know. Ronan's voice was calm. Ignore her. She's not important. She wants me gone. She wants a lot of things she's not going to get. He guided Clara toward a group of younger guests. Focus on the people who matter, the ones who can actually help us. The next hour was a masterclass in social warfare. Ronan introduced Clara to a carefully selected group, Lord Sterling and his wife, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret who ran the county's largest textile operation, several younger aristocrats who seemed more interested in business than bloodlines. Each introduction followed the same pattern: polite greeting, subtle assessment, cautious acceptance. Clara could feel them measuring her, trying to figure out where she fit in Ronan's world. She didn't give them easy answers. When Lady Margaret asked about her family, Clara said simply, "The Whitlocks of Iron Ridge Manor." When one of the younger men asked how she'd met Ronan, she smiled and said, "Through mutual interests." When Genevieve Pembroke appeared and asked with false sweetness if Clara rode often, Clara looked her dead in the eye and said, "Often enough." She was learning. Every non-answer was a small victory. Every moment she didn't shrink was progress. And then Somerset called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," and his voice carried across the courtyard. "Before we begin the hunt, I have a few announcements. First, the route today will take us through the eastern woods. He continued with logistics, rules, safety, meeting points. Clara only half listened, her attention caught by the way Ronan had gone very still beside her, like a predator preparing to strike. And finally, Somerset was saying, I've been informed that we have a special announcement from Duke Hale. The courtyard went quiet. Every eye turned toward them. Ronan stepped forward, and Clara had no choice but to follow. They stood at the center of attention, exposed and vulnerable, and Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Thank you, Somerset. Ronan's voice carried effortlessly. I'll keep this brief. I'm pleased to announce that Miss Clara Whitlock has agreed to become my wife. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara watched the shock ripple through the crowd like a physical wave, saw mouths fall open, saw eyes go wide, saw the moment when everyone's calculations had to completely reset. Vivian looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Lydia actually swayed on her feet. Beatrice made a small, choked sound. And then the whispers started, a rising tide of speculation and judgment and barely concealed scandal. Can't be serious. That girl? But she's nobody. What is he thinking? Ronan's hand found Clara's and raised it slightly, claiming her in front of everyone. The wedding will be in 3 months at Hale Park. You're all invited. He said it with such absolute certainty that it sounded like a done deal, not a business arrangement. Clara forced herself to stand straight, to meet the stares without flinching. Somerset recovered first, his expression carefully neutral. Well, congratulations are in order, I suppose. Shall we begin the hunt? The crowd dispersed slowly, people still staring, still whispering. Clara felt the weight of their judgment like a physical pressure. Breathe, Ronan murmured. You're doing fine. They hate me. They don't know what to make of you. There's a difference. He guided her toward the horses being brought out. Now comes the interesting part. The hunt itself was chaos. Riders thundered through muddy fields, horses straining against the weather, hounds baying somewhere ahead. Clara pushed Tempest hard, keeping pace with the main group, refusing to fall behind. Rain lashed her face, turned the ground treacherous, made every jump a risk. But she'd trained for this. Thornby's brutal lessons had prepared her for exactly these conditions. She cleared a stone wall that made several other riders pull up short, took a water jump without hesitation. When a fallen log appeared in her path, she didn't slow, just trusted Tempest and sailed over it. Somewhere ahead, Ronan rode like he was racing the devil. Behind her, she could hear other riders struggling, cursing the weather. They reached the first checkpoint, a clearing where Somerset's servants had set up refreshments under canvas tents. Clara dismounted, her legs shaking, and accepted the hot cider someone pressed into her hands. Impressive riding, Miss Whitlock. She turned to find Lord Stirling approaching, his face flushed from exertion, but his eyes approving. Thank you, Lord Stirling. No, I mean it. You kept pace with riders who've been hunting these grounds for decades. He glanced toward where Vivian stood with a group of older women, all of them shooting dark looks in Clara's direction. I imagine that's not sitting well with certain parties. Clara followed his gaze. Vivian was speaking urgently to Lady Ashford, who looked uncomfortable. I imagine not, Clara said quietly. Well, Stirling raised his cup in a small salute. Good. About time someone shook things up around here. He moved away before Clara could respond, leaving her standing in the rain wondering if she'd just won an unexpected ally. The second half of the hunt was even more brutal. The rain turned to sleet, the jumps got higher, the pace more demanding. Clara's entire body screamed at her to slow down, to play it safe. But she didn't. She pushed harder, rode faster, refused to be the weak link. When they finally returned to Somerset Estate 3 hours later, she was soaked to the bone and shaking with exhaustion. But she'd finished. She'd kept up. She hadn't broken. Ronan appeared at her side as servants rushed forward with warm blankets. You were reckless, he said. You told me not to show weakness. I told you not to get killed proving a point. But there was something in his eyes that might have been pride. Although I'll admit, you made an impression. He wasn't wrong. As Clara stood there dripping and exhausted, she caught the looks from other riders. Not all of them were hostile. Some were reassessing, calculating. She was no longer just the nobody Duke Hale had inexplicably chosen. She was someone who could ride, who could keep up, who belonged in the saddle at least, if nowhere else. It was a start. The evening's dinner was held in Somerset's Grand Hall, a massive room with vaulted ceilings and long tables laden with more food than Clara had seen in her entire life. She'd been given time to change into a dress Mrs. Garrison had packed, deep blue silk that made her skin look porcelain, and her hair had been tamed into something approximating elegance. She looked like she belonged here. She still felt like an imposter. Ronan escorted her into the hall with his hand at the small of her back. They were seated near the head table, a position of honor that made Clara's stomach twist. On one side was Lord Sterling and his wife. On the other, Vivienne. Of course. Her stepmother sat rigid in her chair, Lydia beside her looking mutinous. Beatrice was farther down the table, her face pale and tight. The meal began with painful formality. Conversations flowed around Clara while she picked at her food, hyper-aware of Vivienne's presence just feet away. Finally, her stepmother spoke. "Miss Whitlock." Vivienne's voice was poison wrapped in silk. Or should I say, future Duchess. How delightful. Clara set down her fork carefully. "Lady Whitlock. I must confess your engagement came as quite a surprise. We had no idea you and Duke Hale were so close." Every word was designed to wound, to imply impropriety, to suggest Clara had trapped him somehow. "No," Clara said evenly. "I don't imagine you did." Vivienne's smile sharpened. "One does wonder how such an attachment formed. You've been so very sheltered all these years." "Have I?" Clara met her stepmother's eyes directly. "I suppose it depends on your definition of shelter." The barb landed. Vivienne's face tightened fractionally. Lady Sterling, who'd been listening with poorly concealed interest, spoke up. "I think it's lovely. A true romance, clearly. The way Duke Hale looks at Miss Whitlock is quite intense." Clara's cheeks heated. She didn't dare look at Ronan. "Indeed," Vivienne said coldly. "Very sudden." "Not really." Ronan's voice cut across the conversation like a blade. He'd been talking to Somerset, but had clearly been listening. "Clara and I have known each other for some time. We simply chose to keep it private." The lie was smooth, effortless. No one could challenge it without calling a duke a liar. Vivienne's hand tightened on her wine glass. "How discreet." "I value privacy." Ronan's eyes were hard. "Something your family seems to struggle with." The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Several people nearby stopped their own conversations to listen. Vivienne's face went white. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Ronan leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "I've heard the most interesting rumors about Iron Ridge Manor lately, about how certain family members are treated, about the atmosphere in the household." Clara's breath caught. He was threatening her, publicly. Vivienne seemed to realize it too. Her composure cracked just slightly. "Surely you don't believe common gossip." "I believe what I see." Ronan's voice was deadly quiet. "And what I've seen suggests that Clara leaving Iron Ridge Manor was the best decision she could have made." The silence at their end of the table was absolute. Lady Sterling broke it with a delicate cough. "Well, I'm sure we're all delighted that Miss Whitlock has found such happiness. Duke Hale, you're a very lucky man." "I know," Ronan said, and he said it like he meant it. The rest of the meal passed in strained politeness. Vivienne didn't speak to Clara again, but her fury was palpable. Lydia looked close to tears. Beatrice just stared at her plate, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. When dinner finally ended, guests moved to the drawing rooms for cards and conversation. Clara excused herself to find a moment of quiet, slipping into a side hallway that led to a conservatory. She was standing among the potted plants, trying to slow her racing heart, when she heard footsteps behind her. That was quite a performance. Clara turned to find Genevieve Pembroke standing there, her expression difficult to read. "I don't know what you mean," Clara said carefully. "Please." Genevieve moved closer. "The blushing fiancé act. The devoted couple. You almost had me convinced." Clara's stomach dropped. "It's not an act, isn't it?" Genevieve's smile was sharp. I've known Ronan Hale for 5 years. He doesn't do love. He doesn't do romance. He does business. So whatever this arrangement is, she gestured vaguely, it's not what you're pretending. Clara's mind raced. If Genevieve saw through it, how many others did? I don't owe you explanations, she said finally. No. But you might want to be careful. Genevieve's voice dropped. Because there are people watching. People who would love nothing more than to see Ronan Hale humiliated. And if they figure out this marriage is a sham, she paused. Well, it won't end well for either of you. Before Clara could respond, Genevieve swept away, leaving her alone with the weight of that warning. Clara stood there for a long moment, her thoughts churning. Then she squared her shoulders and walked back toward the drawing rooms. If people were going to watch, let them watch. Let them try to pick apart the truth. She'd survive worse than speculation. She found Ronan in the main drawing room, deep in conversation with Somerset and several other men. When he saw her, something in his expression shifted, softened, fractionally. Clara. He held out his hand. Come here. She crossed the room and took it, feeling the weight of every eye following her movement. Gentlemen, Ronan said, you'll excuse us. I'd like a word with my fiancée. He guided her out onto a terrace that overlooked the darkened gardens. The rain had stopped, leaving everything clean and cold. Genevieve cornered me, Clara said without preamble. Ronan's expression didn't change. What did she say? That she knows this isn't real, that people are watching, that if anyone figures out we're... She stopped. She basically threatened us. Genevieve's been trying to trap me into marriage for 3 years. Of course she's bitter. Ronan leaned against the railing. Let her talk. Unless she has proof, it's just jealous speculation. And if she finds proof? She won't, because we're not going to give her any. He looked at Clara seriously. This only works if we're committed. If we act like this is real in every moment, with every person, no cracks, no doubts. Clara's throat tightened. That's asking a lot. I know, his voice softened. But you've already done the hardest part. You stood up to your stepmother. You rode like you belonged here. You made them see you. He paused. Now we just have to make them believe the rest. How? Ronan was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped closer, close enough that Clara could feel the heat radiating from him despite the cold air. By selling it, he said quietly. By making every interaction look like I chose you because I couldn't help myself. By making them believe you're not just my business partner, you're the woman I can't imagine living without. Clara's heart stuttered. That's acting, I know. But something in his eyes suggested it wasn't entirely acting anymore. Can you do it? Clara thought about Vivian's face at dinner, about the whispers that would follow her forever if this failed, about the alternative, going back to Iron Ridge Manor, going back to being invisible. Yes, she said, I can do it. Ronan's hand came up to cup her face, his touch warm against her cold skin. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, right there on the terrace where anyone could see. But he didn't, just held her gaze with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. Then we're going to win, he said. They returned to the drawing rooms and spent the rest of the evening playing their parts. Ronan was attentive without being excessive. Clara was composed but warm. They moved through the crowd like they'd been together for years instead of days. And slowly, so slowly, Clara almost didn't notice it happening. The whispers began to change. Not everyone was convinced. Vivian still looked murderous. Genevieve still smirked knowingly. Lady Ashford pursed her lips with obvious disapproval, but others were softening. Lord Sterling introduced Clara to his business associates with genuine warmth. Lady Margaret engaged her in a conversation about estate management that actually seemed interested in Clara's opinions. Even Somerset, watching from across the room, nodded approvingly when Ronan's hand settled possessively on Clara's waist. They were winning. Not completely. Not yet. But the tide was turning. The night ended with an announcement from Somerset that the wedding would indeed be the event of the season, a declaration that forced even the disapproving guests to accept the inevitable. Ronan and Clara left shortly after, climbing into the carriage as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon. Clara sagged against the seat, every muscle in her body screaming. She'd been performing for nearly 20 hours straight, and the exhaustion was crushing. "You did well," Ronan said quietly. "I'm not sure I can do this for 3 months." "You don't have to do it alone." He was watching her with that same intense focus. "That's the point of a partnership." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, saw the exhaustion in his own face, the tension he'd been carrying all night. He'd been performing too, fighting his own battles while making sure she survived hers. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight, for all of it." Ronan's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. "You're welcome." They rode in silence for a while. Then Clara asked the question that had been burning in her chest all evening. "Was any of it real?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." Ronan was quiet for so long Clara thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I don't know," he said finally. "I went into this thinking it was pure strategy. A business arrangement that served us both," he paused. "But watching you tonight, watching you hold your ground against people who would have destroyed you just to feel powerful." His voice dropped. "I'm not sure anymore what's strategy and what's something else." Claire's heart kicked against her ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this might be more complicated than I planned." He met her eyes. "And I don't know if that's a problem or not." The honesty of it stole her breath. This man who claimed to never feel things that didn't serve a purpose was admitting that something had shifted, that she'd gotten under his carefully constructed armor. "I don't know either," Clara whispered. They looked at each other in the growing dawn light, the space between them charged with something neither could name. Whatever happened next, whatever this arrangement became, they'd crossed a line tonight, made themselves a target together, declared war on the society that had tried to break them both. And Clara realized, sitting there exhausted and terrified and strangely exhilarated, that she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. The weeks leading up to the wedding moved like a fever dream, too fast and too slow all at once. Clara woke each morning at Hale Park, still half expecting to find herself back in her small room at Iron Ridge Manor, still bracing for Vivian's cold dismissal or Beatrice's casual cruelty. But instead, she woke to sunlight streaming through tall windows, to Mrs. Garrison bringing tea without being asked, to a life that felt borrowed from someone else's story. Ronan was everywhere and nowhere. He'd leave before dawn on business, meetings with Sterling about shipping routes, negotiations with the consortium of old money families who still treated him like an upstart. But he'd return in the evenings and find Clara, asking about her day with genuine interest, pushing her to keep training with Thornby even though the engagement was already announced. "The announcement doesn't make you safe," he'd said when she questioned the continued lessons. "It makes you a bigger target. Keep getting stronger." So she did. She rode until her muscles burned. She practiced shooting until her hands steadied. She studied the guest list for the wedding with the same intensity she'd once reserved for avoiding notice, learning names, connections, weaknesses. She was preparing for war. They both were. The invitations had gone out 2 weeks after Somerset's hunt. Thick cream paper with elegant script announcing the marriage of Clara Whitlock and Duke Ronan Hale. 300 guests. The event of the season. The responses came flooding back, some warm, some coldly formal, some clearly sent through gritted teeth. Vivian's response arrived in an envelope so stiff it could have stood on its own. A single word. Declined. Clara had expected that. What she hadn't expected was the letter that came with it, not from Vivian, but from her father. "My dearest Clara," Edmund had written in shaking script, "I cannot attend your wedding. Vivian has made it clear that if I do, she will leave and take Lydia and Beatrice with her. I am a coward for letting this stop me, but I am too weak to face losing what little family I have left. Please forgive me. You deserve better than what I've given you. You always have. Your father, Edmund." Claire had read it 3 times, waiting for the hurt to come, but all she felt was a distant, hollow acceptance. Her father had chosen. Again. And this time she didn't need him to choose differently. She burned the letter in the fireplace and didn't mention it to Ronan. The morning of the wedding arrived with unseasonable warmth and brilliant sunshine that felt almost mocking in its perfection. Clara stood in her dressing room while Mrs. Garrison and 2 assistants worked on transforming her into a bride. The dress was stunning, ivory silk with delicate beading that caught the light like frost. It fit perfectly, molded to her body in ways that made her look elegant and dangerous all at once. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Garrison said, her voice softer than Clara had ever heard it. "I look terrified," Clara corrected. "That too." The housekeeper smiled. "But beauty and terror aren't mutually exclusive, especially not today." There was a knock at the door. Mrs. Garrison opened it to reveal Thornby, dressed in formal riding gear that looked uncomfortable on her soldier's frame. "Captain," Clara turned, surprised. "Duke Hale asked me to check on you." Thornby's sharp eyes swept over her. "Make sure you hadn't bolted." "I haven't." "Good, because there are 300 people downstairs and half of them are betting you won't show." Thornby stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Prove them wrong. Walk down those stairs like you own them. Like you were born for this." Clara's hands trembled as she adjusted her veil. "What if I'm not ready?" "No one's ever ready for war." Thornby's expression softened fractionally. "But you've been training for this your whole life. Every time you survived your stepmother's cruelty, every time you held your ground when they tried to make you disappear, this is just the final battle. And if I lose? Then you lose fighting." Thornby gripped her shoulder briefly. "But I don't think you will. You're too stubborn to fail now." She left before Clara could respond, and Mrs. Garrison handed her a small bouquet of winter roses, white and crimson, bound with silver ribbon. "It's time," the housekeeper said gently. Clara descended the grand staircase of Hale Park, with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The main hall below was filled with guests, aristocrats in their finest, all turned to watch her approach. She could feel their judgment like a physical weight, could hear the whispers even over the string quartet playing in the corner. At the bottom of the stairs stood Ronan. He was dressed in black and silver, his dark hair swept back, his expression unreadable. But when his eyes met hers, something shifted in his face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper she couldn't name. He held out his hand, Clara took it, and his grip was steady, grounding. "You look," he started, then stopped. "I don't have words." "Terrified?" Clara suggested quietly. "Magnificent." His voice was low enough that only she could hear it. "Like you could burn this whole place down if you wanted to." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips curve. "Is that what we're doing?" "If necessary." His hand tightened on hers. "Ready?" "No, absolutely not." But she nodded anyway. They walked together into the drawing room that had been transformed into a chapel. 300 faces turned toward them. Clara spotted Lord Stirling and his wife, Lady Margaret, several of the younger aristocrats from Somerset's hunt. She saw Genevieve Pembroke in the third row, her expression unreadable, saw Lady Ashford pursing her lips with obvious disapproval, and in the very back row, partially hidden, her father. Edmund Whitlock, looking older and smaller than she remembered, his eyes wet. He'd come after all. Clara's breath caught, but she didn't stop walking. Vivian wasn't there. Neither were Lydia or Beatrice. Their absence was conspicuous, deliberate, a final insult. Clara found she didn't care. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. The officiant's words washed over her in waves she couldn't quite process. She heard herself making promises to honor, to cherish, to stand beside this man she barely knew. Heard Ronan echo the same vows in his steady, unflinching voice. And then he was sliding a ring onto her finger, a band of platinum with a single diamond that caught the light like a star. And the officiant was pronouncing them married. "You may kiss your bride," he said. Ronan's eyes met Clara's, a question in them. She nodded fractionally. He kissed her. Not passionately, not like the romantic fantasies she'd never let herself have, but firmly, deliberately, like he was making a statement to everyone watching. His hand came up to cup her face, and for just a moment, Clara forgot about the audience, forgot about the performance. For just a moment, it felt real. When they pulled apart, the room erupted in polite applause. Clara turned to face the guests as Ronan's wife, and the weight of it nearly staggered her. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. The reception was held in Hale Park's massive ballroom, all crystal chandeliers and polished marble. Tables groaned under the weight of food Clara couldn't taste, wine she was too nervous to drink. The orchestra played waltzes while couples swirled across the floor. Clara stood beside Ronan at the head table, greeting an endless stream of well-wishers. Most were gracious, offering congratulations that ranged from genuine to painfully forced. Some were openly hostile, their smiles tight and their words sharp with barely concealed contempt. Clara met them all with the same calm composure Ronan had taught her. Name, smile, thank you. Nothing more, nothing less. When Lord Sterling approached, his greeting was warm and his handshake genuine. "You've caused quite a stir, Your Grace," he said to Clara, using her new title. The words felt strange in her ears. Your Grace, Duchess. She was a duchess now. "So I've noticed," Clara managed. "Good. This crowd needed stirring." Sterling leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I haven't enjoyed a wedding this much in years. The scandalized looks alone are worth the trip." Despite her nerves, Clara found herself smiling. "Happy to provide entertainment, Lord Sterling." "Oh, you're providing much more than that." His expression turned serious. "You're changing things, making people reconsider their assumptions. That takes courage." After he moved on, Ronan touched her elbow lightly. "You're handling this well." "I'm barely handling it at all." "Could have fooled me." His voice held something that might have been pride. "They expected you to crumble. Instead, you're standing here like you belong." "Do I?" Clara asked quietly. "Belong?" Ronan's expression shifted, became more serious. "You belong anywhere you decide to stand. That's what you've proven." Before Clara could respond, the orchestra struck up another waltz. Ronan held out his hand. "Dance with me. It's expected." Clara let him lead her onto the floor. They moved together more smoothly than at the Ashford ball. Weeks of practice had improved her footwork, and Ronan's lead was confident enough to compensate for her remaining uncertainty. "People are watching," Clara murmured. "Let them." Ronan's hand tightened on her waist. "We have nothing to hide." But that was the problem, wasn't it? They had everything to hide. This whole marriage was a careful construction, a business arrangement dressed up as romance, and if anyone discovered the truth— "Stop thinking so loud," Ronan said. "I can practically hear your mind racing." "How do you do it?" Clara asked. "How do you make it look so easy?" "Practice. And understanding that most people are too focused on their own performances to notice the cracks in yours." He spun her, and Clara's breath caught at the sudden movement. "Besides, you're better at this than you think. You've been performing your whole life, just in a different way." "What do you mean?" "You performed invisibility. Performed being small and harmless so your family wouldn't destroy you." His eyes were dark and intense. "This is just a different role, and you were always a better actress than they deserved." The words landed somewhere deep in Claire's chest, settling like truth. The music ended. They separated, and Clara was immediately claimed by Lady Margaret for a conversation about estate management that was surprisingly engaging. Then Lord Somerset's wife wanted to discuss the upcoming charity auction. Then a younger woman, Clara didn't know, asked breathlessly about the honeymoon plans. Clara fielded each question with increasing confidence. She was learning the rhythm of this world, when to speak, when to deflect, when to simply smile and say nothing. She was learning to exist without apologizing. The sun was setting when the incident happened. Clara had stepped out onto the terrace for a moment of quiet, her head spinning from champagne and conversation. She was watching the last light fade from the sky when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned expecting Ronan and found Genevieve Pembroke instead. "Congratulations, Your Grace," Genevieve's voice dripped with false sweetness. "You've certainly risen quickly. From nobody to duchess in a matter of weeks. Quite the accomplishment." Clara's spine stiffened. "Thank you." Although one has to wonder, Genevieve moved closer, her smile sharpening. "How long you can maintain the charade?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please, we both know this marriage is a business arrangement. Ronan needed a wife to legitimize his dealings with the old families. You needed escape from your dreadful stepmother. It's all very practical." Genevieve's eyes glittered. "But the problem with practical arrangements is they tend to fall apart under scrutiny." Clara's heart kicked, but she kept her voice steady. "You're making assumptions." "I'm making observations." Genevieve leaned against the railing. I've watched Ronan reject every eligible woman in the county for 5 years, and suddenly he marries a girl no one's ever heard of? A girl with no connections, no dowry, no social standing? She laughed. Something doesn't add up. Maybe he chose me because I don't play games. Or maybe he chose you because you were convenient. Genevieve's voice turned hard. And when he's done using you to get what he wants, he'll discard you just as easily. Men like Ronan don't marry for love. They marry for power. The words were designed to wound, and they landed. Because part of Clara, the part that still remembered being unwanted and invisible, believed them. Are you finished? Clara asked quietly. For now. Genevieve turned to leave, then paused. Although you might want to ask yourself, if this marriage is real, why hasn't he touched you? Why does he look at you like you're a business partner instead of a wife? She swept away before Clara could respond, leaving her standing alone in the gathering darkness. Clara's hands trembled as she gripped the railing. Was Genevieve right? Was she just a convenient tool in Ronan's larger game, and when he no longer needed her? She's wrong, you know. Clara spun. Her father stood in the doorway, looking uncertain and smaller than she remembered. Father, the word felt strange in her mouth. You came. I almost didn't. Edmund moved onto the terrace slowly, like he was approaching something wild. Vivian was furious when I told her I was coming anyway. She's probably going to leave me over this. I'm sorry, Clara said automatically. Don't be. Edmund's voice cracked. I'm the one who should be sorry. For every year I let her treat you like you didn't matter. For every moment I chose my own comfort over your safety. He stopped a few feet away. For letting you grow up thinking you were invisible. Clara's throat tightened. Why are you telling me this now? Because I watched you walk down those stairs today, and I saw your mother in you, Helen. She was... He paused, his eyes wet. She was the strongest person I ever knew, and I failed her by not raising you the way she would have wanted, by letting grief make me weak. Father, let me finish. Edmund's voice was firmer now. That woman, Genevieve, she's wrong about Duke Hale. I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. It's not the look of a man using someone. It's the look of a man who's found something he didn't know he needed. He stepped closer. And I've seen the way you look at him, like maybe you're not performing anymore. Clara's breath caught. It's complicated. Love usually is. Edmund reached out hesitantly, then let his hand drop. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. Don't deserve to call myself your father after everything I failed to do. But I wanted you to know I'm proud of you. Proud of the woman you've become despite everything working against you. The words broke something in Clara's chest. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Edmund pulled her into an awkward, desperate hug. I'm so sorry, he whispered, for all of it, for not being the father you deserved. Clara let herself cry against his shoulder, mourning not just for what she'd lost, but for what she'd never had in the first place. When she finally pulled back, her father's face was wet too. What will you do? Clara asked. If Vivian leaves? I don't know. Edmund's smile was sad but genuine. But maybe it's time I learned to stand on my own. You did. Maybe I can too. He left before Clara could respond, disappearing back into the ballroom. She stood there for a long moment, trying to collect herself when Ronan appeared. Your father's leaving, he said. He wanted me to tell you goodbye. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Ronan moved closer, his eyes searching her face. What happened? Genevieve cornered me, said... Clara's voice broke. Said this marriage was fake, that you were using me, that when you were done you'd discard me. Ronan's expression went cold and hard. She said that? And my father said she was wrong. That you look at me like... Clara stopped, unable to finish. Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Come with me, he said. He led her through the ballroom, ignoring the curious stares, and up the grand staircase to the private wing of Hale Park. They stopped outside a door Clara had never entered. This is my study, Ronan said. The one place I don't let anyone else inside. He opened it, and Clara stepped into a room that was pure Ronan. Dark wood, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, maps and ledgers covering a massive desk. But what caught her attention was the wall opposite the fireplace. It was covered in sketches, architectural drawings of buildings, landscapes, ships, and in the corner, Clara moved closer, her breath catching. There were sketches of her, dozens of them, her profile as she'd stood in the forest that night they'd met, her hands gripping reins, her face in concentration during shooting practice, her smile, rare but captured perfectly. "I draw when I'm thinking," Ronan said quietly from behind her. "It helps me work through problems." Clara turned to face him. "These aren't problem-solving. These are obsession, maybe." He moved closer, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "I told you this started as strategy, a business arrangement that served us both, and I meant that. But somewhere between the Ashford ball and now, something changed." He paused. "You changed it. How?" "By being exactly who you are. By refusing to perform for anyone except when it served your survival. By standing in rooms full of people who wanted to destroy you and not breaking." His hand came up to cup her face. "By making me remember what it felt like to actually give a damn about someone." Claire's heart was hammering. "Ronan, I'm not good at this," he said, his voice rough. "At feelings, at vulnerability, at anything that isn't strategy. But I need you to know, this stopped being fake for me a long time ago. If it ever really was." Clara searched his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the business calculation. But all she saw was raw honesty. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Good. So am I." He leaned his forehead against hers. "But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of admitting I care." Clara closed the distance between them, kissing him with all the fear and hope and desperate emotion she'd been holding back for weeks. Ronan responded immediately, his arms coming around her like he'd been waiting for permission to stop pretending too. This kiss was nothing like the one at the ceremony. This was real, messy and uncertain, and absolutely terrifying in its honesty. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ronan's expression had shifted into something almost vulnerable. "So," he said, "what now?" Clara thought about Genevieve's accusations, about the guests downstairs still whispering, about the fact that this marriage had started as pure strategy. "Now we make it real," she said. "Not for them. For us." Ronan's smile was fierce and genuine. "I can work with that." They returned to the ballroom together, and something had shifted. Clara could feel it in the way Ronan's hand settled on her waist, possessive but tender. Could see it in the way he looked at her when someone asked about their plans. They weren't performing anymore. They were living it. The reception continued late into the night. Guests gradually departed, offering final congratulations or barely concealed skepticism. By midnight, only a handful remained: Lord Stirling and his wife, Lady Margaret, a few of Ronan's business associates. Clara stood in the center of the ballroom, exhausted but exhilarated, and realized something profound. She'd won, not just the battle against Vivian or the war for social acceptance. She'd won herself back, reclaimed the parts of her that had been buried under years of being told she didn't matter. "Your Grace?" Clara turned to find one of the servants holding out a letter. "This just arrived, marked urgent." Clara broke the seal with trembling fingers. The handwriting was Vivian's, sharp and precise. "Clara, you have made your choice, and I have made mine. I am leaving Iron Ridge Manor and taking Lydia and Beatrice to London. Your father can rot in his guilt and his whiskey. As for you, enjoy your moment of triumph. But remember, marriages built on lies never last. When Duke Hale tires of you, you'll have nowhere to go, no family, no home, nothing. I hope it was worth it. Vivian." Clara read it twice, waiting for the hurt to come, but all she felt was a distant, quiet satisfaction. "Everything all right?" Ronan appeared at her shoulder. Clara handed him the letter. He scanned it, his expression darkening. "She's bitter because she lost," he said flatly. "Ignore it." "I'm not hurt," Clara said, surprising herself. "I'm just relieved. She's gone. She can't touch me anymore." Ronan studied her face, then pulled her close. "No one can touch you anymore. Not unless you let them." The remaining guests departed shortly after. The servants began cleaning up, moving quietly through rooms still littered with champagne glasses and wilted flowers. Clara and Ronan stood together on the terrace, watching the sun rise over the grounds of Hale Park. "What happens now?" Clara asked quietly. "Now?" Ronan's arm tightened around her waist. "Now we build something real. Run the estate together. Break the monopoly on the southern routes. Make the people who doubted us choke on their assumptions." Sounds exhausting. Probably. He looked down at her, and his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. "But we'll do it together. As partners. As equals. As husband and wife," Clara added. "That too." Ronan's smile was genuine, unguarded. "Turns out I'm better at being married than I thought." Clara laughed, a real, unrestrained sound that surprised them both. "That's setting the bar pretty low." "I'm a practical man. Low bars are easier to clear," but his voice was warm, almost teasing. They stood there as the morning light grew stronger. Two people who'd started as strangers using each other for survival and somewhere along the way had become something more. 3 months later, Clara stood in the drawing room of Hale Park, reviewing shipping contracts with Lord Stirling, while Ronan negotiated with representatives from the Southern Consortium. She'd learned the business faster than anyone expected. Turns out years of being invisible had taught her to observe, to calculate, to see patterns others missed. "Your Grace," Stirling said, using her title with obvious respect now. "These terms are excellent. Better than Hale could have gotten alone." Clara smiled. "That's the point of a partnership, Lord Stirling. We're stronger together." When the meeting ended and Stirling departed, Ronan found her in the study, his study that had become theirs, filled now with both their papers and plans. "You impressed him," Ronan said. "I impressed myself." Clara set down her pen. 6 months ago, I was invisible. Now I'm negotiating shipping contracts with aristocrats who used to look through me like I was furniture. You were never invisible. Ronan moved behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders. You were just surrounded by people too blind to see you. Clara reached up to cover his hand with hers. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. For making me see myself. She turned to look up at him. For giving me the chance to become this. Ronan leaned down and kissed her. Still intense, still demanding, but now laced with something deeper than strategy. You gave yourself that chance, he said when they pulled apart. I just helped clear the obstacles. That evening, they hosted a dinner at Hale Park. The guest list included Lord Stirling, Lady Margaret, several of the younger aristocrats who'd proven themselves allies, and, surprisingly, Lord Somerset himself. The conversation was lively, focused on business and politics rather than gossip and scandal. Clara held her own, offering insights that made Stirling nod approvingly and Somerset look at her with newfound respect. After dinner, as guests gathered in the drawing room, Somerset pulled Clara aside. Your Grace, he said, I owe you an apology. Clara raised an eyebrow. For what? For doubting you, for assuming this marriage was... He paused. Well, for assuming wrong. His expression turned serious. You and Duke Hale have built something remarkable, a true partnership. It's rare in our world. Thank you, Lord Somerset. I mean it. You've changed things, made people reconsider what strength looks like, what power looks like. He smiled. My wife says you're going to reshape society whether society likes it or not. After he moved away, Ronan appeared at Clara's side. What did Somerset want? He asked. To apologize for underestimating me. Clara's voice held wonder. Can you believe that? Yes. Ronan's hand found hers. You're the Duchess of Hale. People who underestimate you do so at their own risk now. Clara looked around the room, at the guests who respected her, the home that was truly hers, the life she'd built from nothing. She thought about Vivian, alone somewhere in London nursing her bitterness, about Lydia and Beatrice, probably still trying to trap aristocrats into loveless marriages, about her father who'd finally found enough spine to choose his daughter over his wife. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, invisible, afraid, convinced she'd never matter. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned to take up space without apology, who'd learned that strength wasn't about being perfect. It was about refusing to stay buried. What are you thinking? Ronan asked quietly. Clara turned to face him fully. That I'm not invisible anymore. that I never have to be invisible again. No, Ronan agreed, his voice fierce with certainty. You don't. That night, after the guests had departed and the house had settled into quiet, Clara stood at the window of the bedroom she now shared with Ronan. She looked out at the grounds of Hale Park, the estate she helped run, the land that was partially hers, the future she was building one deliberate choice at a time. Ronan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Regrets? He asked. Clara thought about everything she'd lost, the family that never wanted her, the safety of being invisible, the illusion that she could survive by making herself small. And she thought about everything she'd gained, power, partnership, a voice that people actually listened to, the freedom to exist without apology. Not even one, she said. They stood there together as the moon rose over Hale Park, two people who'd started as a business arrangement and become something neither had planned for, something real, something strong enough to survive the world that had tried to break them both. Clara Whitlock? No, Clara Hale, Duchess of Hale, had been the woman no one chose, the girl society tried to bury, the invisible daughter who should have disappeared, but she'd refused. She'd fought her way into existence, claimed her space, built her power from nothing. And now? Now she was the woman who couldn't be ignored, the Duchess who made old families reconsider their assumptions, the force that reshaped the world that tried to destroy her. She'd survived, she'd won, and she'd done it by refusing to stay invisible. In the end, Clara proved the ultimate truth. She was never nothing. The world simply wasn't strong enough to see her until she made them look.